Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October mornings in our new neighborhood had this perfect chill that made you want to stay in bed just 5 more minutes. But Bailey never let that happen. Our golden retriever had discovered the joy of having a real backyard after we moved to Willow Drive 6 months earlier. And at 28, I'd finally become one of those suburban homeowners who stood at the kitchen window every morning, coffee in hand, watching their dog chase squirrels. My wife Jenna and I had left apartment living behind for this exact reason, to give Bailey space to run. A proper yard with a 6-foot fence the previous owners had built. Room to be a dog instead of being cooped up all day. He'd bolt outside the second I opened that back door, tail wagging so hard his whole back end swayed, investigating every corner like he'd never seen it before, even though we'd been through this routine hundreds of times. That particular Tuesday morning started the same way, with Bailey racing into the yard while the coffee maker gurgled behind me, except this time, when I called him back inside 20 minutes later, the yard was completely empty. The silence hit me first. That strange absence of jingling collar tags and panting that usually announced Bailey's return before you even saw him. He never ignored his name, never stayed out when you called, especially not when you rattled that treat container he could hear from 3 houses away. The gate was still latched tight, no gaps under the fence where a 70-pound retriever could squeeze through. No broken boards, nothing disturbed at all. Jenna came running outside when she heard me shouting Bailey's name over and over, still in her bathrobe with her phone already in her hand, to check if anyone had posted about finding a lost dog. We tore that yard apart looking for any sign of how he got out, checked behind the shed where he sometimes hid tennis balls, crawled under the deck with a flashlight, walked the fence line twice examining every single board. The next 3 days blurred together into a nightmare of making flyers at the print shop, refreshing Facebook lost pet groups every hour, calling shelters during our lunch breaks at work, driving slowly through the neighborhood until 2 in the morning with the windows down calling his name. Then on the 4th night, just as we were finally forcing ourselves to get some sleep, we both heard it clear as day through our bedroom window. Bailey's distinctive bark, that specific pitch and rhythm we knew better than anything, coming from somewhere close by, maybe 2 or 3 houses away at most. Jenna grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin, both of us sitting up in bed at the exact same moment, not even breathing as we listened. There it was again, that familiar deep woof followed by 2 shorter barks, the pattern Bailey always did when he wanted attention. We threw on whatever clothes we could find in the dark, me in sweatpants and a paint-stained shirt from renovating the bathroom, Jenna in my old college hoodie that went down to her knees. The street was dead quiet at that hour, porch lights off except for the motion sensors that clicked on as we hurried past each house, trying to follow the sound. It led us 3 houses down to the crafts place, though calling them neighbors felt generous since we'd maybe exchanged 5 words total since moving in. The barking was definitely coming from their property, specifically from the detached garage at the end of their driveway. And now that we were closer, I could hear something else too. Other animals moving around, scratching, a few soft whines that definitely weren't Bailey. My first instinct was to just march up and bang on their front door, but Jenna pulled out her phone, whispering that we should call the police because something wasn't right about this whole situation. Before I could answer, the garage's side door creaked open, and Walter Kraft stepped out, wearing flannel pajama pants and a white undershirt that had seen better days. He had this peculiar way of standing, shoulders rolled forward like he was trying to make himself smaller, thin gray hair sticking up at odd angles like he'd been sleeping on concrete. The man couldn't have been more than 5'6", probably mid-50s, with these thick glasses that reflected the streetlight and made it impossible to see his eyes. "Can I help you folks?" he asked in this reedy voice that reminded me of a clarinet played badly, taking a few shuffling steps toward us while keeping one hand on the garage door handle. When I told him we'd heard our dog barking from inside his garage, he tilted his head at this weird angle, like a bird examining something shiny, and just stood there for maybe 10 seconds without saying anything, long enough that Jenna stepped behind me, and I could feel her breathing getting faster. "Your dog," Walter finally said, not really a question, more like he was tasting the words, and then his mouth stretched into this wide grin that showed too many teeth, the kind of smile that made you want to take a step back. Yes, your golden retriever, beautiful animal. Such a gentle temperament. Loves peanut butter treats, doesn't he?" The specific details made my skin prickle because how could he possibly know about the peanut butter treats? And why was he talking about Bailey like they were old friends? He started fumbling with a massive ring of keys. Had to be at least 30 of them jangling together, muttering something about safety and protection while he searched for the right one. "You must have been so worried," he continued in that strange, reedy voice. "But I assure you, he's perfectly fine. Better than fine, actually. I've been taking excellent care of him and all the others." That word, others, hung in the air between us like a physical thing, and I watched Jenna pull out her phone again, this time actually dialing someone, probably the police, while Walter kept sorting through those keys with fingers that trembled just slightly. The garage door swung open and the smell hit us immediately, this mixture of wet dog, old newspaper, and something sharp like industrial cleaner that burned the inside of your nose. Walter flicked on a single bare bulb that swayed from a wire, casting these crazy shadows that made everything look twice as big as it actually was. What I saw in that garage still shows up in my dreams sometimes, not because it was gruesome or bloody, but because it was so methodically arranged, so precisely organized. Along both walls were metal cages, the kind you'd see at a vet's office, stacked too high and running the entire length of the space, maybe 12 or 14 total. Each cage had a water bowl, a small blanket folded into a perfect square, and a laminated index card taped to the front with information written in tiny obsessive handwriting. Names, addresses, dietary preferences, medical conditions, favorite toys. Bailey was in the third cage on the left, lower level, and when he saw us, he started barking like crazy, pawing at the cage door, his tail going so fast it was just a golden blur. But he wasn't alone in there. I counted at least 8 other animals, mostly dogs, but also 2 cats in the upper cages, including a black lab I recognized from the missing posters on Oakwood Street, and a beagle that belonged to the Nguyens who lived behind us. Walter stepped into the garage behind us, moving with this strange shuffling walk, and started talking in this calm, almost proud voice, like he was giving us a tour of some kind of achievement. They were all in danger, you see, every single one of them, and nobody else seemed to notice or care enough to do something about it. He walked over to Bailey's cage and stuck his fingers through the bars to scratch behind his ears, and Bailey, my dog who usually loved everyone, pressed himself against the back of the cage trying to get away from him. "Your fence, for instance," Walter continued, pulling out a small notebook from his pajama pocket and flipping through pages covered in the same tiny handwriting, "has a weak spot near the northwest corner where the wood is rotting from sprinkler damage. Could collapse any day now. And then where would Bailey be? Lost, scared, maybe hit by a car on the busy street 2 blocks over." He had pages and pages of notes about every house in the neighborhood, sketches of yard layouts, detailed schedules of when people let their pets out, which dogs were left alone during the day, which cats were allowed to roam at night. The Nguyens' beagle, according to his notes, was at risk because they often forgot to latch their gate properly, and the black lab from Oakwood Street had nearly been poisoned because the owners used pesticides on their lawn without reading the warnings about pet exposure. "You're all so careless with them," Walter said, and for the first time his voice had an edge to it, this undercurrent of genuine anger that made me instinctively move closer to Jenna. "Leaving them outside in thunderstorms, feeding them cheap food full of chemicals, letting them run around without proper supervision, treating them like property instead of family." He opened another cage and pulled out a small terrier mix I didn't recognize, cradling it against his chest while it trembled and tried to squirm away. This one was left tied to a tree for 6 hours yesterday while the owners went shopping. 6 hours in the sun, with only a tiny bowl of water that tipped over within the first 30 minutes. His fingers were gentle with the dog, but his grip was firm, not letting it escape despite its obvious distress, and those thick glasses caught the swaying light in a way that made his whole face look distorted. I've been watching all of you for months, documenting the neglect, the casual cruelty, the complete inability to provide proper care, and finally, I decided someone had to intervene. Someone had to keep them safe until you all learned to be better guardians. Behind us, I could hear sirens in the distance getting closer, and Jenna must have actually gotten through to the police, but Walter didn't seem to notice or care, just kept stroking that terrified little dog while explaining how he'd been slipping into yards during the day when people were at work, using special treats he'd developed himself with calming herbs to make the animals trust him. The police cars pulled into the driveway with their lights flashing but no sirens now, and 2 officers got out, hands resting on their holsters as they approached the garage. Walter finally looked up, seeming genuinely confused by their presence, still holding that shaking terrier like a baby. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here," he said in this bizarrely cheerful tone. "Perhaps you can help me explain to these people about proper pet ownership, about the responsibilities they've been shirking." The cops exchanged looks that told me they'd dealt with situations like this before, one of them speaking into his radio, while the other approached Walter slowly, using this calm, measured voice to ask him to put the dog down and step outside. But Walter just launched into another speech about how he'd been documenting everything for the authorities, how he had folders and folders of evidence at his house showing neglect and abuse, how he was actually doing everyone a favor by intervening. He reached into his pocket again and I saw both officers tense up, but he just pulled out a thick rubber-banded stack of index cards, trying to hand them over like they were some kind of official report. "Every incident is logged here," he insisted. "Dates, times, photographic evidence I can show you. Temperature readings showing dogs left in hot cars for 12 minutes, cats without water for entire afternoons. It's all here, all documented. I was keeping them safe until someone would finally listen." What happened next was both pathetic and disturbing in a way that's hard to describe. Walter started crying. Not dramatic sobs, but these silent tears that ran down his face and fogged up his glasses, while he still tried to maintain that horrible smile. He set the terrier down carefully in its cage, his movements slow and deliberate like he was handling china, then walked over to Bailey's cage and opened it with one of his many keys. Bailey bolted straight to us, nearly knocking me over, whimpering and pressing against our legs like he was trying to merge with us, and I dropped to my knees to hold him, feeling him shake against my chest. I gave him his heartworm medication, Walter told us matter-of-factly while the officer guided his hands behind his back for the handcuffs. "The dose you were 3 days late on according to the schedule on your refrigerator calendar, which I photographed through your kitchen window last month." The specificity of that violation, the casual admission that he'd been watching us through our windows, made my stomach turn in a way that had nothing to do with the smell in that garage. The second officer was already opening cages, checking tags and collars, calling in additional units to help return all the animals while Walter kept talking, explaining his feeding schedules, which animals had special dietary needs, reminding them that the tabby cat in cage 7 had diabetes and needed insulin shots twice a day. Information he couldn't possibly have known unless he'd been inside people's houses or going through their trash to find vet records. They led Walter away, still talking, still trying to explain his system, mentioning something about a larger facility he'd been preparing in his basement for winter months when the garage would be too cold. The way he said it so casually, like it was the most logical thing in the world, made everyone freeze for a second before one of the officers radioed for a warrant to search his house immediately. Over the next 2 hours, the street filled with police cars and animal control vans, neighbors coming out in their robes and slippers as officers returned their missing pets, some of whom had been gone for weeks, according to the dates in Walter's meticulous records. The woman from Oakwood Street burst into tears when they brought out her black lab, and the Nguyens kept apologizing to their beagle, like it could understand them, promising better gate latches and longer walks and premium food from now on. Inside Walter's house, they found what he'd mentioned: a half-finished setup in the basement with heating lamps, ventilation systems, and enough caging to hold probably 30 animals, along with filing cabinets full of surveillance photos, detailed maps of the neighborhood with every pet marked, and journals going back 2 years describing his growing disgust with what he saw as unfit pet owners. He'd been planning this for so long, convinced he was some kind of savior, and the really twisted part was that some of the animals actually were in better condition than when they disappeared, well fed and groomed, their medical needs attended to with a precision that would have been admirable if it hadn't been completely insane. We got Bailey home just as the sun was coming up, both Jenna and I calling in sick to work, because neither of us could imagine leaving him alone that day. He wouldn't eat at first, just followed us from room to room, needing to keep us in sight at all times, flinching whenever we walked past the back door like he thought someone might take him again. The detective who came by that afternoon to take our full statement told us Walter had been a veterinary technician years ago, lost his license after getting caught stealing animals from the clinic he worked at, supposedly to give them better homes with people he deemed worthy. This whole thing had been his twisted attempt at running some kind of intervention program, and he genuinely couldn't understand why everyone wasn't grateful for his help. We changed our locks even though Walter was in custody, installed security cameras that probably made us look paranoid, and started walking Bailey on a leash, even in our own fenced yard. The neighborhood felt different after that, smaller somehow. Like the safe distance between houses had collapsed and we were all uncomfortably aware of how easily someone could watch us, document our routines, decide we weren't good enough. 6 months later, we moved across town to a house with a taller fence and better sight lines from the windows. And sometimes when Bailey barks at nothing in the middle of the night, I still get this sick feeling in my gut, wondering who might be out there taking notes, deciding whether we deserve to keep him. I had just gotten my first solo apartment a few months before everything went to hell, finally able to afford living alone after years of splitting rent with roommates who never did their dishes. It was September 2022, and I'd been in this one-bedroom unit in a quiet building near downtown Columbus since May, working from home as a medical transcriptionist and genuinely enjoying the peace and quiet. The building was one of those pre-war constructions with thick plaster walls that actually did their job. You could barely hear anything from the other apartments, which was perfect for someone like me who needed complete silence to focus on audio files and medical terminology. Most of my neighbors were either retired folks or other young professionals who minded their own business, and the building manager, an older guy named Frank, kept everything running smoothly. I was 28, and finally feeling like a real adult with my name on a lease, my own furniture, and nobody else's mess to clean up. Everything changed when the guy in apartment 2B moved in that August, right next door to my unit, 2A. From day one, there was something unsettling about him beyond just the noise issue that would eventually develop. He had this peculiar habit of standing in the hallway for long periods, not doing anything, just standing there breathing heavily like he'd run a marathon. I'd catch glimpses of him through my peephole sometimes when I heard footsteps stop outside my door. A tall, lanky man, probably in his 40s, with greasy shoulder-length hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He never made eye contact with anyone in the building, always kept his head down, but you could feel him watching you once you passed him. The elderly couple across the hall, the Andersons, mentioned to me once that they'd seen him carrying in strange equipment at odd hours, industrial-looking cases and metal pipes that seemed too heavy for normal household use. The noise started about 3 weeks after he moved in, always between midnight and 4 in the morning, this rhythmic mechanical grinding that would pulse through the wall we shared. It wasn't music or television or even normal construction sounds. It was something else entirely, like heavy machinery being operated in intervals, 15 minutes on, 10 minutes off, over and over again. The sound would vibrate through my bedroom wall, making sleep impossible, and I'd lie there trying to figure out what the hell someone could be doing at that hour that would create such a specific pattern of noise. I tried earplugs, white noise machines, even moved my bed to the opposite wall. But nothing helped because the vibrations seemed to travel through the floor and ceiling too. After 2 weeks of this torture, averaging maybe 3 hours of sleep a night, I was exhausted and desperate, making stupid mistakes in my transcription work that I'd never made before. That Friday night in mid-September, when the grinding started up at exactly midnight like clockwork, I finally had enough and called the police to file a noise complaint. The dispatcher sounded bored, probably dealt with these calls all the time, but she said they'd send someone over when they had a unit available. I watched through my peephole as 2 officers showed up about an hour later, knocked on 2B's door, and had what looked like a brief, calm conversation with my neighbor, though I couldn't hear what was being said. The noise stopped immediately after they left, and for the first time in weeks I got a full night's sleep, thinking maybe the problem was finally solved. I even left a polite note under his door the next morning, apologizing for involving the police but explaining that I really needed quiet to work and sleep, trying to smooth things over like a reasonable adult. Saturday passed without incident. No noise, no encounters in the hallway, nothing unusual at all. And I actually started to relax, caught up on some overdue transcription assignments, and even went out for drinks with a friend that evening. When I got home around 10 that night, slightly buzzed and in a good mood for the first time in weeks, I noticed something on my doormat that definitely hadn't been there when I left. It was a plain manila envelope, no markings, no address, no stamps, just sitting there perfectly centered on the welcome mat like someone had placed it with deliberate care. I picked it up, noticed it was light, almost weightless, and figured maybe it was from the building manager, or possibly even an apology note from my neighbor. The hallway was dead silent as I unlocked my door, and I remember thinking how nice it was to finally have peace and quiet again, how maybe things would go back to normal now. Inside my apartment, I tossed my keys on the counter and opened the envelope while walking toward my bedroom, pulling out what appeared to be a single photograph, printed on regular computer paper. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing, because it made no sense. It was a picture of someone sleeping in a bed, taken from above at an angle, like whoever took it had been standing at the foot of the bed looking down. The person in the photo was lying on their side, face partially visible against the pillow, wearing a white t-shirt I recognized immediately, because it had a small coffee stain near the collar that I'd been meaning to bleach out. My legs went weak as I realized I was looking at myself, asleep in my own bed, in my own room, photographed by someone who had been standing right there, maybe 3 feet away from where I'd been unconscious and completely vulnerable. The walls of my apartment suddenly felt paper thin, like they couldn't protect me from anything, and I had to grab the doorframe to steady myself as the full implications hit me. With trembling fingers, I flipped the photo over and found a timestamp printed on the back in small black numbers. Friday, September 16th, 2022, 1:47 a.m. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I realized that was last night, less than 24 hours ago, about 30 minutes after the police had left, and I'd finally fallen asleep. Someone had been in my apartment, in my bedroom, standing over me while I slept, close enough to touch me, and I hadn't woken up, hadn't heard anything, hadn't even stirred. I ran to my bedroom and checked everything. The window was still locked from the inside. The bedroom door showed no signs of tampering. Nothing was out of place or missing. My laptop and wallet were still on the nightstand exactly where I'd left them. The only evidence that someone had been there was this photo. This impossible photo that shouldn't exist, taken by someone who had somehow gotten into my locked apartment without leaving a trace. I immediately called 911 again, this time reporting a break-in. My voice shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat myself twice. While waiting for the police, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and went through every inch of my apartment, checking closets, behind the shower curtain, under the bed, anywhere someone could possibly hide. The same 2 officers from the night before showed up, and I could see the skepticism in their eyes when they recognized me. probably thinking I was some paranoid troublemaker trying to get back at my neighbor. But when I showed them the photo, their expressions changed completely, especially when the younger one pointed out something I hadn't noticed in my panic. In the background of the photo, barely visible in the darkness, you could see the reflection of the camera flash in my bedroom mirror. And in that reflection, there was the vague outline of a figure holding up a phone. They took the photo as evidence, dusted for fingerprints around my door and windows, and told me they'd question the neighbor again. But we all knew there was no real proof he was the one who'd taken it. After the police left, there was no way I was staying in that apartment alone, so I packed a bag with shaking hands and called my friend Kevin to ask if I could crash at his place for a few nights. While throwing clothes into my duffel bag, I kept checking every corner of my bedroom, paranoid that someone might still be watching, and that's when I noticed something that made my knees buckle. My bedroom door had one of those old-fashioned keyholes, the kind you could look through if you wanted to, and there were fresh scratch marks around it on the hallway side, like someone had been picking at the paint with their fingernails. But what really got me was when I bent down to look closer. There were smudges on the brass keyhole cover, greasy fingerprints that caught the light, and when I looked through the keyhole from the hallway side, I had a perfect view of my bed. Someone had been watching me through that keyhole, probably for weeks, learning my sleep patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. Kevin picked me up within 20 minutes, and I spent that night on his couch, jumping at every little sound, unable to close my eyes without seeing that photo in my mind. The next morning, running on zero sleep and pure adrenaline, I went straight to the building manager Frank's office and told him everything, showed him copies I'd made of the photo before giving the original to the police. Frank went pale when he saw it, immediately started talking about changing locks and installing security cameras. But then he said something that made everything click into place in the worst possible way. He mentioned that the previous tenant of 2B had moved out suddenly after complaining about someone entering his apartment while he was at work, finding things moved around, food missing from his refrigerator, and once even finding muddy footprints leading from his bedroom to the bathroom that weren't his shoe size. Frank had dismissed it as paranoia at the time, thought maybe the guy was having mental health issues, but now he was starting to wonder if there was something more to it, maybe something involving the building's maintenance access, or the old servants' passages that had been sealed up decades ago but might still have weak points. That afternoon, Frank called in a contractor to inspect the walls between apartments 2A and 2B, and what they found still gives me nightmares when I think about it. Behind my bedroom closet, which shared a wall with 2B, there was a panel that had been carefully cut and replaced, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and press. It opened into a narrow space between the walls, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways, filled with old insulation and decades of dust, except for one area that showed clear signs of recent disturbance. A path worn through the grime, fresh scratches on the wooden beams, and horrifyingly, a small pile of candy wrappers and empty water bottles stashed in the corner. The contractor followed the passage and found it connected not just our two apartments, but ran through the entire length of the building, with access points cut into several units, all done with precision tools that explained the grinding noise I'd been hearing. My neighbor hadn't been making noise to annoy me. He'd been cutting his way into the walls, creating his own private network of passages to watch and visit whoever he wanted, whenever he wanted. The police arrested him that same day, found him in his apartment surrounded by hundreds of photos printed on cheap computer paper. Pictures of me, the Andersons, the young couple in 1A, even Frank checking the mail, all taken without our knowledge over the past month. His laptop had folders organized by apartment number, each containing detailed notes about our schedules, when we showered, when we took out trash, when we were deepest in sleep, everything documented with a patience that made me physically sick to read about later in the police report. They also found recording equipment, tiny cameras, and worst of all, a key-making kit with impressions for multiple apartments, though the passages had made those unnecessary. He never said a word during the arrest, just stared at the officers with this blank expression. And even now, after everything that's come out, nobody knows why he did it, what he was planning, or if photographing us sleeping was the extent of it, or just the beginning of something worse. I moved out the next week, broke my lease without penalty given the circumstances, and found a new place across town, a modern building with security cameras and a doorman who checks everyone who enters. The guy from 2B got 18 months in prison for criminal trespass and stalking, which seems like nothing considering what he put us all through, but at least he's on the registry now and has a restraining order keeping him away from all of us who lived in that building. Sometimes I still wake up at night thinking I hear that grinding sound, and I compulsively check my closets for hidden panels, run my fingers along the walls looking for seams that shouldn't be there. The Andersons moved to Florida to be closer to their kids. The young couple in 1A broke their lease too, and last I heard, Frank was having trouble finding new tenants, even after having all the walls professionally sealed and installing a complete security system. What haunts me most isn't just that he was watching us, but wondering how many other buildings have someone like him, carefully cutting through walls in the middle of the night, creating their own secret network of passages, documenting the lives of people who think they're safe in their own homes. I sleep with my bedroom door locked now, a chair wedged under the handle, and a camera pointing at my bed that uploads to the cloud, because I learned the hard way that walls and locks don't mean anything if someone wants to watch you badly enough. My electric toothbrush was facing the wrong direction that morning. Sounds stupid, right? But when you charge the same blue Oral-B in the exact same spot every single night for 2 months, you notice when it's suddenly pointing at the wall instead of the mirror. I stood there in my pajamas, holding my coffee mug with the chipped handle, staring at it like it might explain itself. The bathroom still reeked of that persistent mildew smell that no amount of bleach could kill, and somewhere in the walls, the old pipes were doing their morning gurgle routine. Jason's door was closed, had been since I woke up. He usually got home from his warehouse shift around 4 in the morning, slept until noon, then disappeared again by the time I got back from work. We'd been sharing this creaky Victorian on Birch Avenue since July, and I could count on one hand the number of actual conversations we'd had. The thing about Jason was that he moved through the house like smoke. In 2 months of living one thin wall away from him, I'd never heard him sneeze, cough, or even clear his throat. Sometimes I'd come out of my room and he'd just be standing in the kitchen, so still and quiet that I'd actually gasp when I noticed him. He'd do this slow blink thing, like a reptile processing whether you're prey or not, then go back to whatever he was doing, usually eating cereal straight from the box or staring at his phone with the screen brightness turned way down. 30-something years old and built like someone had stretched a normal person out on a rack, all gangly limbs and sharp elbows, but harmless. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself whenever that little alarm bell went off in my head. After the toothbrush incident, more things started being out of place. My favorite sweater, this oversized burgundy thing I'd stolen from an ex, was folded differently in my drawer. Not messy, just different. The sleeves tucked under instead of over, like someone who didn't know my system had carefully put it back. Then my perfume bottle migrated 3 inches to the left on my dresser. My laptop charger got wrapped with the cord going clockwise instead of counterclockwise. Little things that made me feel like I was going crazy, because who the hell would notice which way their charger cord was wrapped? But when you live alone in your own space, even with a roommate in the house, you develop these unconscious patterns. And when those patterns get disrupted, your brain starts firing off warning signals even if you can't articulate exactly what's wrong. I started testing myself, taking photos of my room before leaving for work each morning. Phone propped against my mirror, capturing my desk, my dresser, my nightstand, even the way my shoes lined up by the door. Then I'd compare them when I got home, zooming in like some kind of detective, looking for differences. Most days, nothing. But then on a Friday, 2 weeks after the toothbrush thing, I caught it. My hairbrush had rotated maybe 45 degrees. The book on my nightstand, some self-help garbage about reclaiming your power after trauma that my sister had given me, was closed, even though I distinctly remembered leaving it open, pages down, to hold my place because I'd lost the receipt I was using as a bookmark. These weren't things that could happen from the house settling or vibrations from trucks outside. Someone had been in my room. The rational part of my brain kept making excuses. Maybe I was stressed from the Johnson campaign at work. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe I had some kind of weird memory problem. I even Googled carbon monoxide poisoning symptoms, because I'd read this Reddit thread once about someone who kept finding creepy notes in their apartment that turned out to be from themselves during co-induced blackouts. Bought a detector that same day, $23 at Home Depot, and installed it in my room. The levels were fine. Everything was fine. Except I knew it wasn't. That crawling sensation you get when someone's watching you? I had it constantly now, even when Jason wasn't home, especially in my room, like the walls themselves had absorbed someone's attention and were playing it back on a loop. I tried the logical approach first, changed my door handle to one with a lock. Jason didn't say anything about it when we passed in the hallway, just did his signature slow blink and shuffled to the kitchen. Started keeping my valuable stuff in a lockbox under my bed, jewelry, passport, the emergency cash my dad insisted I keep hidden. But the little disturbances continued. A single hair tie moved from my nightstand to my desk. My face wash turned backward in the shower caddy, my pillow slightly off-center on the bed. Whoever was doing this wasn't interested in stealing from me. They just wanted to touch my things, to leave these tiny fingerprints on my life that only I would notice. It was like living with a ghost who got their kicks from gaslighting you. Except ghosts don't eat Lucky Charms at 2 in the morning or leave their work boots by the front door. The camera was $49 on Amazon, this tiny thing that looked like a phone charger cube. I set it up on a Sunday when Jason was at work, positioned it on my bookshelf between a fake plant and some old college textbooks I'd never thrown away. The angle captured most of my room, the bed, the door, the dresser. The app sent clips to my phone whenever it detected motion. The first few days were just me getting ready in the morning, coming home and flopping on my bed. Normal stuff. I started to feel stupid, paranoid, like maybe I really was just stressed and imagining things. Then Wednesday night happened. I was at my friend Megan's place for her birthday dinner, one of those wine and pasta nights that stretched until midnight. Jason would definitely be at work. He always left by 7:30 sharp. But at 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The video was 18 seconds long, and I watched it right there at Megan's dining table while everyone else was arguing about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. The quality was grainy in the low light, but clear enough to see my bedroom door slowly open. A figure stood in the doorway for a full 5 seconds, just a dark silhouette against the hallway light. Then Jason, unmistakably Jason with his too tall frame and mantis-like posture, stepped inside. He moved weird, like he was walking through water or trying not to disturb the air molecules. He went straight to my bed, stood beside it for 3 seconds, then carefully, deliberately sat down on my floor, right beside the bed. The video cut off there because he'd stopped moving enough to trigger the motion sensor. But I knew he was still there, just sitting, in the dark, next to where I sleep. I left Megan's immediately, made up some excuse about food poisoning and drove to the 24-hour Walmart parking lot. Sat there in my car with the doors locked, going through every video from the past 3 days with this sick weight in my stomach. There were more, so many more. Every single night Jason had come into my room, sometimes at 10, sometimes at 2 in the morning, but always the same routine. Enter slowly, walk to my bed, sit on the floor. The camera only caught him in clips when he moved, but by comparing the timestamps I figured out he was staying in there for hours. 3 hours one night, 4.5 another, just sitting on my floor in the dark, facing my bed, completely still. In one video from Monday night, the infrared picked up his face when he shifted slightly. His eyes were open, staring directly at where my head would be on the pillow. Not sleeping, Not on his phone, just watching the space where I would have been. The worst part was finding myself in the footage. There I was, dead asleep, sprawled across my bed with my mouth probably open, completely defenseless while this man sat 3 feet away from me in the darkness. In one clip from Saturday night, I'd turned over in my sleep, arm hanging off the bed, fingers nearly touching the floor where he sat. He didn't move away. He just stayed perfectly still, letting my hand dangle inches from him. Another video showed him doing something with his hands near his face. It took me 6 replays to realize he was smelling something. My hair tie. The one that had been moved from my nightstand. He'd been collecting them, these little pieces of me, and just sitting there in the dark, breathing them in while I slept above him completely unaware. I called the police from that Walmart parking lot, but what do you even say? A grown man entering my room at night without permission was enough to get them interested at least. 2 officers met me back at the house at 1 in the morning. Jason's shift would keep him away until 4. They took my statement, watched the videos, and one of them actually went pale when he saw the footage of Jason just sitting there, staring. They helped me grab my essential stuff while we waited for the emergency protective order paperwork to go through. I remember the younger cop kept checking behind doors as we packed, like he expected Jason to materialize from the shadows. They waited while I stuffed clothes into garbage bags, grabbed my laptop, my documents, anything I couldn't replace. The older officer told me I was smart to get out, that these situations tend to escalate, that people who violate boundaries like this rarely stop on their own. He said it real quiet, like he'd seen where this kind of thing leads. I stayed at Megan's place that night, and for 2 weeks after while I searched for a new apartment. The landlord let me break the lease without penalty after the police explained the situation. Jason was evicted within a week. Turns out I wasn't the first complaint, just the first with video evidence. Megan came with me to get the rest of my stuff on a Saturday afternoon. Broad daylight, Jason long gone according to the landlord. But his room door was open, and I couldn't help looking inside as we passed. The walls were covered, absolutely covered, with photos printed on regular paper. All of rooms, not just mine, but previous tenants' rooms too, based on the different furniture. All taken from floor level, as if someone was sitting on the ground looking up at empty beds. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, overlapping like scales. In the center, newer than the rest, were screenshots from my social media, pictures I'd posted of myself in my room, selfies on my bed, but edited somehow. Zoomed in on my sleeping face in the background of a mirror selfie I'd taken months ago. How long had he been planning this? How many others had there been before me? I never got those answers because Jason disappeared completely after the eviction. The police said he'd given a fake last name on the lease, paid rent in cash, and the warehouse had no record of him working there. Sometimes I still dream about those hours he sat in my room, and I wake up checking the floor beside my bed, even though I live alone now in a studio apartment with 3 deadbolts and a security system. Sometimes I still feel like someone's watching me sleep, but at least now I know it's just the ghost of that fear, not a real person sitting in the darkness, breathing in the scent of my life. The house on Hawthorne Lane wasn't much to look at. Yellow siding that needed repainting, a cramped kitchen with outdated appliances, and a yard so small you could mow it in 5 minutes flat. But for a 26-year-old veterinary assistant trying to save money, it was exactly what I needed. I'd been working at the animal clinic downtown for about 8 months when I found the rental listing, and the price was too good to pass up. Moving day was a Saturday in August. Just me and a borrowed pickup truck full of second-hand furniture and cardboard boxes labeled in my messy handwriting. The neighborhood seemed quiet, almost sleepy, with kids riding bikes in lazy circles and sprinklers clicking across brown lawns. I remember thinking how normal everything looked, how perfectly suburban and safe, the kind of place where people probably still left their doors unlocked. That first week I kept busy unpacking and trying to make the place feel like home. hanging curtains and scrubbing years of grime off the bathroom tiles. My neighbor to the left was a man named Douglas Harmon, probably in his early 50s, with thinning gray hair that he always combed straight back with too much gel. He worked at the local hardware store. I'd seen him there when I bought paint for my bedroom, and drove a beige Toyota Camry that he washed every Sunday morning at exactly 8:30. Douglas had this peculiar way of smiling, where only the corners of his mouth moved up while his eyes stayed completely flat, like someone had taught him the mechanics of smiling, but not the actual emotion behind it. He'd wave when he saw me getting my mail, always the same rigid motion like he was signaling a plane for landing. The thing that struck me most about Douglas was how methodical he was about everything. His lawn was cut in perfect diagonal stripes, his garbage cans were always placed exactly 3 feet from the curb, and every single night at 9:15, he'd walk out to his backyard shed with a heavy padlock and secure it with 3 separate clicks that I could hear through my bedroom window. At first, I didn't think much about the shed routine. Plenty of people lock up their tools or lawn equipment, especially in neighborhoods where teenagers might get bored and start poking around. But after a few weeks, I started noticing other things about Douglas and that weathered wooden structure at the back of his property. The shed itself was maybe 8 by 10 feet, painted the same faded green as his house trim, with a single window covered from the inside by what looked like aluminum foil. He'd check that padlock in the morning before leaving for work, sometimes pulling on it 2 or 3 times to make sure it held. On weekends, he'd spend hours out there with the door cracked just wide enough for him to slip through, and I'd hear the faint sound of shuffling papers and the occasional metallic scrape. Once when I was trimming the bushes along our shared fence line, he came out so fast when he heard me that he left the shed door swinging open for maybe 2 seconds before he yanked it shut and gave me that mechanical smile, asking if I needed to borrow any gardening tools. The really strange part started about 2 months after I moved in, on a Wednesday afternoon in early November. I'd called in sick to work because of a nasty stomach bug that had me running to the bathroom every hour. Around 3 in the afternoon, I was lying on my couch trying to keep down some crackers when I heard Douglas's car pull into his driveway, way earlier than his usual 6 o'clock return. Through the thin curtains, I watched him practically sprint to his backyard, fumbling with his keys like his fingers weren't working right. He unlocked the shed and disappeared inside for maybe 20 minutes, then emerged carrying a cardboard box that he held against his chest with both arms, the way you'd carry something fragile or precious. He loaded it into his trunk and drove off again, but not before I noticed him checking his rearview mirror 3 times before backing out, scanning the street like he expected someone to be watching. That night, the shed locking ritual happened at 9:15 as always, but this time he added a second padlock to the door, one of those circular ones that are supposed to be impossible to cut. I know I should have minded my own business, but living alone in a new place makes you hyper-aware of everything around you, especially when your neighbor starts acting like he's guarding state secrets in a backyard shed. I found myself creating excuses to be in my yard whenever Douglas was home, watering plants that didn't need water, checking a mailbox I knew was empty, pretending to look for a lost earring in the grass near the fence. He caught me watching once, just stood there in his backyard holding a black garbage bag, staring at me with those empty eyes for what felt like a full minute before he asked if I'd seen any stray cats around. The question came out of nowhere, and when I said no, he nodded slowly and said that was good, because he'd hate for any animals to get into his shed and make a mess of his important documents. The way he emphasized important documents made my skin prickle, like he was warning me without actually warning me. After that encounter, I started keeping my blinds closed more often, but I could still hear him out there every night, checking those locks like his life depended on it. The storm hit on a Saturday night in late November, one of those sudden November storms that comes out of nowhere, with winds that make your windows rattle and rain that sounds like someone throwing gravel at your roof. I was in bed reading when the power flickered twice and then went out completely, leaving me in that thick darkness where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. I fumbled for my phone and used the flashlight to find some candles in the kitchen, and that's when I heard it. A loud bang from Douglas's backyard, the unmistakable sound of wood hitting wood. Through my kitchen window, I could see his shed door had blown open and was slamming against the frame with each gust of wind. The strange thing was, Douglas's house was completely dark too, but his car wasn't in the driveway. He'd left about an hour earlier, which I only knew because I'd heard his car door slam and the engine start up. The shed door kept banging, and I kept staring at that dark rectangle of the doorway, telling myself it was none of my business, that I should just go back to bed and let Douglas deal with it when he got home. But the banging wouldn't stop, and after 15 minutes of listening to it, I couldn't take it anymore. I put on my rain jacket and grabbed the flashlight I kept in my junk drawer, the heavy metal one my dad had given me when I first moved out on my own. The rain hit me sideways the second I stepped outside, soaking through my pajama pants in seconds. I climbed over the low fence between our yards. Douglas didn't have a gate on my side, and my bare feet squelched in the muddy grass as I made my way to the shed. The door was swinging wildly, and I had to time it right to grab the handle without getting smacked in the face. When I finally caught it and pulled it fully open, my flashlight beam swept across the interior, and for a second I thought I was seeing things wrong, that the rain was distorting my vision somehow. The walls were completely covered, floor to ceiling, with laminated pieces of paper arranged in perfect rows, like some kind of demented gallery. I stepped inside just enough to get out of the rain, and that's when I realized what I was looking at. Missing person flyers, dozens and dozens of them. They weren't random or chaotic. Each flyer was meticulously placed with exactly 2 inches between them, held up by small brass pins that gleamed in my flashlight beam. Some of the faces looking back at me were familiar from news stories I half remembered. A college student from the state university who'd vanished after a party 3 years ago. A mother of 2 who'd disappeared from a grocery store parking lot. A teenage boy whose bike was found abandoned by the river. But most were strangers, their smiling photos clearly pulled from social media or family albums, frozen in happier moments before they became statistics. Underneath each flyer, in Douglas's cramped handwriting on strips of white label tape, were dates and locations written in red ink: November 3, 2018, Riverside Mall, or August 17, 2016, Greenwood Park, or January 22, 2024, corner of Madison and 3rd. My flashlight beam was shaking as I moved it across the walls, trying to process what I was seeing. In the corner, there was a metal filing cabinet with labels on each drawer, years going back over a decade. The top of the cabinet had a stack of newspapers, all folded to articles about missing persons, with certain sentences highlighted in yellow. I pulled open the top drawer of the filing cabinet with trembling fingers, and inside were manila folders, each one labeled with a name that matched the flyers on the walls. The first folder I grabbed belonged to a woman named Grace Holloway, who disappeared 2 years ago from a coffee shop downtown. Inside were printed screenshots of her social media profiles, photos that looked like they'd been taken from a distance showing her walking to her car or entering her apartment building, receipts from places she'd shopped, even what appeared to be a handwritten schedule of her daily routine. There was a map with red X marks at various locations around town, and at the bottom of the folder, a clear plastic sleeve containing a silver bracelet with a small charm shaped like a butterfly. My brain was screaming at me to run, to get out of there immediately, but I couldn't stop myself from reaching for another folder. This one was for a man named Robert Chu, missing since 2016, and it contained the same type of surveillance-like photos, the same obsessive documentation, and in the plastic sleeve at the back, a leather wallet with Robert's driver's license still inside. The sound of a car engine cutting through the storm made my entire body go rigid. Headlights swept across the side of the shed as Douglas's Camry pulled into his driveway, earlier than I'd expected him back. I shoved the folders back into the drawer and pushed it closed, but the metal made a loud screech that seemed to echo even over the rain. There was no time to get back to my house. I could already hear his car door slamming and his footsteps on the wet driveway. I did the only thing I could think of and pressed myself against the wall behind the door, trying to control my breathing as Douglas's silhouette appeared in the doorway. He stood there for what felt like forever, rain dripping off his jacket, head moving slowly from side to side like he was examining every inch of his collection. Then he spoke, not loudly but clear enough that I could hear every word over the storm. "I know someone's been in here. Things have been moved." He took a step inside and I could smell him. That mixture of hardware store dust and something medicinal, like hydrogen peroxide. His hand reached for a flashlight hanging on a hook right next to where I was hiding, his fingers inches from my face. Just then, a massive crack of thunder shook the entire shed, and the wind gusted so hard that it ripped the door from Douglas's grip and slammed it fully open against the outer wall, right where I was hidden. The door hit me hard in the shoulder, and I couldn't help the gasp that escaped my mouth. But the sound was completely swallowed by another roll of thunder and the shrieking wind. Douglas cursed and struggled to pull the door closed against the storm, giving me the 3 seconds I needed. I slipped out behind the door and into the rain, crouching low and moving as fast as I could toward the fence. I heard him yell something, but the storm was so loud I couldn't make out the words. I practically dove over the fence, landing hard in my own yard, and scrambled on my hands and knees to my back door. My fingers were so numb from the cold rain that I dropped my keys twice before managing to get inside. I locked the door, then the deadbolt, then shoved a chair under the doorknob for good measure. I spent the rest of that night sitting on my bathroom floor with my phone in my hand, trying to decide whether to call 911. What would I even say? That my neighbor had a creepy collection of missing person flyers. That wasn't illegal. The personal items in those folders, though, the surveillance photos, those had to mean something. But I had no proof, no photos of my own, and I'd been trespassing in his shed. Around 4 in the morning, I finally worked up the courage to peek through my bedroom blinds. Douglas was standing in his backyard, perfectly still in the rain, facing my house. He stayed there for another hour until the storm finally started to die down, then walked back to his shed and secured it with what looked like 3 new padlocks. The next morning, I called in sick to work again and drove straight to the police station. I told them everything, even admitted to trespassing, but the detective who took my statement seemed more concerned about my breaking and entering than anything else. He said they'd look into it, but without evidence of actual crimes, there wasn't much they could do about someone collecting newspaper clippings in their own shed. I packed my things that same afternoon, throwing everything into boxes without even wrapping the breakable stuff, just needing to get out of there as fast as possible. While I was loading my car, Douglas came out of his house and walked over, that mechanical smile plastered on his face. He asked if I was moving, and when I mumbled something about finding a place closer to work, he nodded slowly and said it was probably for the best, that the neighborhood could be dangerous for young women living alone. Then he handed me something, a missing person flyer fresh off a printer, with my photo from my social media profile staring back at me. Underneath the photo, in bold letters, it read, "Missing coming soon," with today's date written in his familiar red ink. I just stood there, unable to move or speak, while he walked back to his house whistling some old tune I didn't recognize. I drove straight to my parents' house 3 hours away and didn't stop shaking until I crossed the county line. I stayed with them for 2 weeks before finding a new apartment in their city, and I never went back to collect my security deposit or the few things I'd left behind. About a month later, I was finally starting to sleep through the night again when I saw a news article that made my whole body go numb. A woman named Claire Brennan had disappeared from Cedar Heights, last seen at a gas station about 6 blocks from my old rental house. The article mentioned that she was new to the area, lived alone, and had just started a job at a dental office downtown. But what really got me was the photo they used. I recognized it immediately as one I'd seen in Douglas's shed, already laminated and labeled with a date that was still 2 weeks in the future, when I'd seen it that night in November. I called the detective who'd taken my statement, Gave him Claire's name and every detail I could remember, but he just said they'd add it to the file. They questioned Douglas apparently, even searched his shed with his permission, but found nothing except what the detective described as an extensive collection of public news materials related to his hobby of following missing persons cases. 2 more people disappeared from Cedar Heights over the next year, both young professionals who'd recently moved to the area, and Douglas still lives in that house. Still locks his shed every night at 9:15, probably with new folders and new photos that nobody will ever believe exist. People warn you about the dangers of living alone after a divorce, but nobody tells you how vulnerable you become when you're desperate for human connection. At 38, I found myself signing a lease for a small rental house on Sycamore Lane in early March of 2023, my belongings still packed in boxes that smelled like the marriage I'd just escaped. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet streets, mature oak trees, the kind of place where people still walked their dogs in the evening and waved at each other from their driveways. I remember thinking this was exactly what I needed to start over, away from the suffocating memories of my failed relationship with Amanda and the endless therapy sessions that couldn't save us. The first week was all about unpacking and trying to make the empty rooms feel less like a reminder of everything I'd lost. My furniture looked wrong in the new space, like actors on the wrong stage, and I spent hours rearranging things just to feel like I had some control over something in my life. I met Diane on my 4th day there, when she appeared at my door with a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil and a smile that seemed genuine enough to lower my guard. She must have been in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that suggested she worked from home. Comfortable sweatpants and an oversized cardigan despite the warming weather. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Daniel," she said, and I remember being surprised she already knew my name, though I figured the landlord must have mentioned it or maybe she'd seen my mail. The lasagna she brought was incredible, layers of homemade pasta and a meat sauce that reminded me of Sunday dinners from childhood, and when I returned her dish the next day, she invited me in for coffee. Her house was the mirror image of mine but felt lived in, with photos covering every surface and the smell of vanilla candles mixing with something baking in the oven. She talked about the neighborhood gossip while refilling my cup 3 times, mentioning how the previous tenant of my house had left suddenly in the middle of the night, which she laughed off as probably just breaking a lease the wrong way. Over the next few weeks, Diane became a constant presence in my new routine, always appearing at just the right moments with exactly what I needed. When I came home exhausted from a particularly brutal day at the accounting firm, she'd knock with takeout from my favorite Thai place, pad ki mao with extra basil, just how I liked it, though I couldn't remember ever mentioning my preference to her. She helped me set up my home office, suggesting I put my desk by the window facing east because morning people like you work better with natural light. And somehow she was right about me being a morning person. The thing is, I'd been working remotely since the divorce, keeping odd hours to avoid thinking too much, so there was no way she could have noticed my schedule from normal neighbor observations. She even brought over a small potted orchid one afternoon, saying it would brighten up my workspace, and mentioned offhandedly that Amanda had never appreciated how hard I worked to provide for us. That stopped me cold, because I knew I hadn't told her my ex-wife's name. The little intrusions started to add up like drops of water, forming a flood I couldn't quite see yet. One evening, she texted me. I'd given her my number for emergencies, asking if I needed anything from the grocery store since she was heading out, and she listed items I was actually out of: milk, eggs, that specific brand of whole grain bread I always bought, even the protein powder I used for my morning shakes. When I mentioned I'd been having trouble with my laptop running slowly, she showed up the next day with a USB drive containing the exact software I needed for my work, plus some extras she thought I might find useful. She knew I was allergic to shellfish without me ever mentioning it, always steering restaurant recommendations away from seafood places. Once she commented on how much better I looked since I'd stopped taking those anxiety medications that clearly weren't working anyway. But I kept my prescription bottles in my bathroom medicine cabinet, and she'd only ever been in my living room and kitchen. The moment that changed everything happened on a Saturday in early June, when Diane invited me over for dinner to meet her book club friends. Been hesitant, but figured it would be good to socialize, maybe meet more people in the neighborhood beyond just her. The dinner conversation was flowing normally, until one of her friends, a woman named Carol with thick glasses and a nervous laugh, mentioned she was a therapist at a practice downtown. "Oh, you must know Dr. Melissa Thornton then," Diane said casually while passing the salad. "She works at the same building, specializes in couples counseling. Daniel's ex-wife Amanda sees her every Wednesday at 4. The table went quiet, and I felt my fork slip from my fingers because not only had I never told Diane about Amanda's therapy, but those sessions were supposed to be from after our separation, something Amanda had started on her own. Carol looked confused and said she didn't think she should be discussing other doctors' patients, while I sat there trying to process how Diane could possibly know something that specific. I excused myself early that night, claiming a work deadline, but really I needed to get away from Diane and think through everything clearly. Back in my house, I started making a list of everything she knew that she shouldn't. My social security number. She'd mentioned the last 4 digits once while joking about identity theft. My mother's maiden name, brought it up when discussing family histories. The password to my Netflix account. She'd recommended shows that only appeared on my personal algorithm. And even the fact that I'd been browsing online dating profiles but hadn't messaged anyone yet. The more I wrote, the more my chest tightened with a feeling I hadn't experienced since the worst days of my marriage. That sensation of being watched, studied, like someone was taking notes on my life. I changed all my passwords that night, using my phone's data instead of my home Wi-Fi, and even put tape over my laptop camera, feeling paranoid but unable to shake the certainty that somehow she was monitoring everything I did. Monday morning, I called a locksmith while Diane was supposedly at her weekly yoga class, something she'd mentioned several times but I'd never actually seen her leave for. The locksmith, a young guy named Tommy with sleeves of tattoos and a reassuring professional demeanor, changed all 3 locks and installed a deadbolt on the back door. While he worked, he made small talk about the neighborhood, mentioning he'd done a lot of work on this street over the years. "Funny thing," he said while testing the new keys. "I changed these same locks about 8 months ago for the previous tenant. Same request too, wanted everything changed immediately, seemed pretty spooked about something." He handed me the new keys and advised me to consider a security system, maybe some cameras, which felt less paranoid and more practical after hearing about my predecessor. I spent the rest of that day working from a coffee shop downtown, unable to focus but needing to be away from the house while I processed everything. When I finally returned home that evening, there was a note taped to my door in Diane's distinctive handwriting, all loops and careful cursive like someone who'd won penmanship awards in school. "Daniel, noticed you had someone working on your door today. Hope everything's okay. Made extra portions of that chicken marsala you love. It's in your fridge. D." My blood turned to ice because I knew I'd locked the door when I left, and the new deadbolt was still engaged when I got back. Inside, sure enough, there was a covered plate in my refrigerator, still warm like it had just been placed there. I searched the entire house, checking windows, looking for any sign of how she'd gotten in, but everything was exactly as I'd left it except for that single plate of food. The chicken was even prepared without mushrooms, accommodating a preference I'd developed after a bad food poisoning incident 3 years ago that I'd never discussed with anyone in this neighborhood. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every creak and shadow, convinced I'd hear her trying the new locks or see her face at my bedroom window. Around 3 in the morning, my laptop suddenly brightened on my desk, the screen waking up despite being closed, and I saw notification after notification popping up on my phone about password reset attempts on accounts I'd forgotten I even had. My old MySpace page, a defunct dating profile from 2015, Even my college alumni portal were all sending security alerts. Then my phone started showing me as active on WhatsApp, though I wasn't touching it, and I watched in horror as the typing indicator appeared in my conversation with my brother in Colorado. The message that sent itself said, "Everything's fine here, just can't sleep," which was technically true but not something I'd typed. I immediately turned off my Wi-Fi router and everything stopped, but when I looked at the available networks on my phone, there it was at the top of the list with full signal strength. "Welcome home, Daniel." The next morning, I knocked on Diane's door, determined to confront her despite not knowing exactly what I'd say or what proof I really had beyond circumstantial strangeness. She answered wearing an apron covered in flour, classical music playing softly from somewhere inside her house, looking every bit the harmless neighbor except for the way her eyes lit up like she'd been expecting me. "Daniel, perfect timing. I just pulled banana bread out of the oven. Your favorite with extra walnuts but no chocolate chips. Just how you mentioned to your mother on the phone last week." I hadn't told her about that call, had made it from my car parked outside the office building specifically for privacy. When I asked her about the Wi-Fi network with my name, she tilted her head with this concerned expression that seemed practiced, rehearsed. "Oh, honey, that's been there since before you moved in. The previous tenant was also named Daniel Brennan. Such a coincidence, right? I never got around to changing it after he left." "Is it bothering you? I can update it if you'd like, though I'll need to reset all my smart home devices." The explanation was perfectly reasonable, except I'd looked up the previous tenant out of curiosity. His name was Christopher Vaughn. I decided to leave that very day, not permanently, but just to get some distance and clarity. Threw together a bag with a week's worth of clothes and my laptop, telling myself I'd stay at a hotel near my office while I figured out next steps. Maybe contacted a lawyer or the police, though I wasn't sure what crime I'd report exactly. As I loaded my car, Diane stood on her lawn watering plants that looked perfectly hydrated already, watching me with this serene smile like she knew something I didn't. "Taking a little trip?" she called out, and when I didn't respond, she added, "Drive safe, Daniel. That construction on Highway 47 can be brutal this time of day. Take Riverside Drive instead, trust me." I hadn't mentioned which direction I was going, but she was right. There was construction on my usual route to downtown. At the hotel that night, 30 miles from Sycamore Lane, I finally felt like I could breathe again. I even laughed at myself a little, wondering if I was overreacting. If maybe she was just a lonely older woman with boundary issues and a few lucky guesses. Then I opened my laptop to do some work and found a new folder on my desktop labeled Memories, filled with photos I'd never seen before. Pictures of me sleeping in my bed taken from different angles, screenshots of my private conversations, even a video file of me singing in the shower from just that morning. The police took my report but seemed skeptical, especially when I admitted I had no idea how she'd gotten the photos or accessed my devices. They said they'd send someone to talk to her, but without concrete evidence of breaking and entering or explicit threats, there wasn't much they could do. I ended up breaking my lease, losing my security deposit but gaining peace of mind, and moved across town to a modern apartment building with security cameras, key card access, and a doorman named Paul who took his job seriously. For weeks afterward, I'd still get texts from unknown numbers with little details only she would know. Reminders to take my vitamins, warnings about traffic on my new commute, recipes for dishes I'd mentioned craving years ago. Eventually, they stopped. Or maybe I just got better at ignoring them. Last month, out of curiosity and against my better judgment, I drove past Sycamore Lane and saw a moving truck in front of my old house. There was a young couple carrying boxes inside, looking excited about their new beginning. And Diane was already there with what looked like a casserole dish, that same welcoming smile on her face. I wanted to warn them but knew how crazy I'd sound, so I just drove away, though I sometimes check the local news, waiting to see their names appear in a story I hope never gets written. February changed everything for me, though it started out like any other month in that old brick building on Pine Street. My 27th birthday had just passed in January, and I'd been living alone in my third-floor apartment for about 2 months, finally making enough at the accounting firm downtown to afford a place without roommates. The apartment wasn't much to brag about, just a one-bedroom with creaky hardwood floors and windows that rattled whenever trucks rumbled past. But having my own space meant everything to me after years of sharing kitchens and bathrooms with strangers. The building itself had character, one of those pre-war constructions where you could hear every footstep, every conversation, every toilet flush from the neighboring units. The guy above me had moved in maybe 3 weeks after I did, and I only knew him as Nathan because that's what the super called him when they were fixing a leak in the hallway one afternoon. The footsteps started as something I barely noticed, just another layer of noise in a building full of sounds. But after a few days, I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Whenever I walked from my bedroom to the kitchen, I'd hear the same path traced above me, the floorboards groaning in an identical rhythm. When I'd settle into my desk chair to work from home on Fridays, his chair would scrape against the floor directly overhead, like clockwork. I started experimenting, taking random routes through my apartment, walking in circles around my coffee table, stopping suddenly in the middle of the room, and each time, those footsteps above would mirror mine perfectly, never missing a beat. The rational part of my brain kept insisting our apartments must have the same layout, that we probably just had similar schedules since we both seemed to work from home, both stayed up late binge-watching shows until the early hours. The first note appeared on a Monday morning, slipped under my door while I was in the shower. Just a plain index card with neat handwriting in blue ink. Hope you're having a good morning. It's nice knowing someone else keeps the same weird hours as me. Nathan from upstairs. I actually smiled reading it, thinking how sweet it was that he'd reached out, and I spent the rest of the day drafting different responses in my head, though I never actually wrote one back. 2 days later, another note. The coffee shop on the corner makes the best blueberry muffins, just thought you should know. This time I left a thank you note taped to his door, keeping things friendly but brief. The notes became a regular thing. Every few days I'd find another one. Always cheerful, always signed the same way, talking about restaurant recommendations or commenting on the weather or making jokes about the couple next door and their Sunday morning arguments. For about 3 weeks, the notes felt like a bright spot in my routine, something that made living alone feel less isolating. Nathan seemed considerate, never knocked on my door directly, never tried to corner me in the hallway, just these little written hellos that I could respond to or ignore as I pleased. But then the tone shifted, so gradually I almost didn't notice at first. "You looked tired yesterday when you came home from work," one said, which seemed odd since I hadn't seen him that day, hadn't passed him in the hallway or anything. Another one read, "That phone call last night sounded stressful. Hope everything's okay," which made my chest tighten because I'd been talking to my mom about some personal stuff, speaking quietly in my bedroom with the door closed. The footsteps above me seemed louder now, more deliberate, and sometimes I'd hear him moving around at 3, 4 in the morning, pacing directly over wherever I happened to be. I started keeping track of the notes in a journal, trying to make sense of what was happening, documenting every strange detail. "You're not alone up here," said one that arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, and something about that phrasing made my skin prickle with unease. Not "you're not alone," which could mean he was just being neighborly, but up here like we were somehow sharing the same space, like the floor between us didn't exist. I began avoiding my apartment during the day, staying late at the office, taking longer routes home, anything to minimize the time I spent beneath those matching footsteps. But the notes kept coming, sometimes 2 in a single day, commenting on things that made no sense. "Your laugh is lovely. You should do it more often," when I hadn't laughed in days. "That green dress really suits you," when I'd worn it inside my apartment with the blinds drawn. The breaking point came on a Saturday night in late February, when I decided to confront him, or at least try to understand what was happening. I'd had a couple glasses of wine for courage, and marched up the stairs to the 4th floor, my heart hammering against my ribs as I stood outside his door. I knocked 3 times, firm but not aggressive, and waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time, and called out his name. Told him I knew he was home because I could literally hear him walking around up there 5 minutes ago. Still nothing, but I could hear movement inside, slow, careful footsteps approaching the door. I saw the peephole darken as he looked through it, and I stood there staring right back, waiting for him to open up, to explain himself, to do something. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, me standing in that dimly lit hallway, him watching me through that tiny lens, until finally I heard him step back and walk away, his footsteps fading into the depths of his apartment. That night changed something between us, like I'd broken some unspoken rule by going to his door. The notes stopped completely. No more index cards under my door. No more friendly observations about my life. But the footsteps got worse, more aggressive somehow, stomping instead of walking, following me from room to room with a determination that felt almost angry. I'd be brushing my teeth and hear him directly above my bathroom, the ceiling creaking under his weight. I'd crawl into bed and immediately hear his bed frame scraping against the floor overhead, positioning himself right above where I lay. I stopped sleeping properly, would doze off on the couch instead of my bed. But even then, I'd wake up to the sound of him settling onto his couch too, the springs groaning in perfect synchronization with mine. I called the super Jerry, told him something weird was going on with Nathan upstairs, but Jerry just laughed and said Nathan was a model tenant, quiet guy, worked in IT, always paid rent on time. I tried explaining about the footsteps, the notes, the way he seemed to know everything about my daily routine. But Jerry looked at me like I was losing it, suggested maybe I was stressed from work. That apartment living took some getting used to. I even called the cops once when the footsteps were particularly bad. Nathan pacing in tight circles above my bed at 4 in the morning. But they said, unless he was threatening me directly or trying to break in, there wasn't much they could do about a neighbor being noisy. The female officer did seem concerned about the notes though. Told me to keep them all, document everything, just in case things escalated. Then came the night I heard my name through the vent, and everything I'd been trying to rationalize came crashing down. It was a Friday, around midnight, and I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the sound of Nathan moving around upstairs. The footsteps had stopped about 10 minutes earlier, and I was just starting to relax when I heard it, soft but unmistakable, drifting down through the heating vent next to my bed. "Jessica," the voice whispered, drawing out each syllable like he was tasting the word. "Jessica, Jessica, Jessica," over and over, this quiet chanting that made my whole body go rigid with fear. I pressed my ear against the vent, thinking maybe I was imagining it, but no. It was definitely coming from above, his voice floating down through the metal ductwork, sometimes laughing softly between repetitions of my name. I grabbed my phone and started recording, needing proof that this was really happening, that I wasn't going crazy like everyone seemed to think. The recording picked up his voice clearly, that sing-song way he said my name, the little humming sounds he made between words. Then he said something that made my blood turn to ice water. "I know you're listening, Jessica. I can hear your breathing. We breathe together, you and me, in and out, in and out." And the horrifying thing was, he was right. I could hear his breathing through the vent, and without meaning to, I'd synchronized my own breathing with his, our inhales and exhales matching perfectly. I held my breath, trying to break the pattern, and immediately heard him laughing. This quiet, delighted sound like we were playing a game and I'd just made a really good move. That was it for me. I couldn't stay there another second. I threw on sweatpants and a hoodie over my pajamas, shoved my phone and wallet into my pockets and ran out of my apartment, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night in my car in a Walmart parking lot, calling every friend I could think of, trying to find someone who'd let me crash at their place for a few days. My friend Brittany finally answered, said I could stay with her as long as I needed, and I drove straight there, showing up at her door at 3 in the morning looking absolutely wrecked. I played her the recording from my phone, and the look on her face told me everything. This wasn't normal, wasn't something I was imagining. This was genuinely terrifying, and I needed to get out of that apartment immediately. I never went back alone after that night. Brittany and her boyfriend came with me that Sunday afternoon to pack up my stuff. And Nathan must have known we were there because the footsteps started the moment we walked in, following us from room to room as we threw my belongings into boxes and trash bags. At one point, Brittany's boyfriend, Mike, got fed up and started yelling at the ceiling, telling Nathan to cut it out, that we knew what he was doing, that the cops had been notified. The footsteps stopped for about 30 seconds, then resumed, but slower, more deliberate, like he was savoring his last chance to mirror my movements. We got everything out in under 2 hours, and as I was doing a final walkthrough, I found one last note that must have been slipped under the door while we were packing. "You'll always be right below me, no matter where you go." I kept that note, added it to my collection of evidence, though I never did anything with it. Never pressed charges or anything. Just wanted to forget the whole thing ever happened. I broke my lease, lost my security deposit, but it was worth it to get away from there, to sleep without wondering if someone was standing directly above me, breathing in sync with my every breath. Last July, at 32 years old, I finally had enough saved up to move into Westbrook Gardens, one of those gated communities you see advertised with perfect lawns and smiling families. I'd been living in cramped apartments since college, dealing with noisy neighbors and broken elevators, so this felt like a massive upgrade. The house wasn't huge, just a modest 2-story with beige siding and a decent backyard, but it was mine. I remember driving through those security gates for the first time with my U-Haul, feeling like I'd finally made it somewhere in life. The guard, an older guy named Harold with thick glasses and a permanent squint, gave me this strange little nod and wrote something down on his clipboard. I didn't think much of it then, just figured he was logging new residents or something routine like that. The first few days were exactly what I'd hoped for after years of apartment living. Quiet streets, kids riding bikes, people walking their dogs in the evening. On my 3rd night there, while I was still surrounded by boxes and eating takeout Chinese food straight from the container, my doorbell rang around 8. Standing there was this group of 5 people, all probably in their 60s or 70s, wearing matching yellow reflective vests with Neighborhood Watch printed across the back. The woman in front, who introduced herself as Dorothy, had this oversized smile and held a plate of chocolate chip cookies that looked store-bought but were arranged on a fancy glass plate. Behind her stood 2 men and 2 other women, all holding walkie-talkies on their belts and carrying these leather-bound notebooks. Dorothy explained they were the official Westbrook Gardens Neighborhood Watch, established in 1987, and they wanted to personally welcome me and invite me to join their group. I invited them in because it seemed rude not to, even though I really just wanted to finish my lo mein and unpack my kitchen stuff. They all filed into my living room and sat down on my one assembled couch without being asked, arranging themselves in this weirdly precise formation, like they'd done this exact thing hundreds of times before. Dorothy did most of the talking, explaining how they met every Monday and Friday at 7 sharp, and that they had a special midnight meeting once a month for what she called priority matters. The way she said it, emphasizing those 2 words while the others nodded in perfect unison, made me uncomfortable. One of the men, who never actually introduced himself but had a name tag that said Eugene, kept writing in his notebook the entire time, his pen moving even when nobody was talking. I tried to peek at what he was writing, but he'd angle the notebook away whenever I shifted my position. They stayed for exactly 30 minutes, and I mean exactly, because when Dorothy's watch beeped at 8:30, all 5 of them stood up simultaneously like they were controlled by the same brain. Before leaving, Dorothy handed me a thick packet of papers, maybe 40 pages, all about neighborhood watch protocols and responsibilities. She said I should read through everything, and let her know by Friday if I wanted to join, adding that participation was strongly encouraged for community harmony. The phrase stuck with me because of how she said it, like she was reciting something she'd memorized. After they left, I flipped through the packet and found pages of rules about patrol schedules, incident reporting procedures, and this whole section about maintaining neighborhood standards that seemed weirdly aggressive for a volunteer group of retirees. The next morning, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to get familiar with the area and maybe meet some neighbors who weren't part of the geriatric patrol squad. That's when I started noticing the symbols. At first, I thought it was just a weird coincidence, but every single house had this same marking, carved into the wood near their mailbox post. It looked like 3 intersecting circles with a triangle in the middle, about the size of a quarter, carved deep enough that it had to be intentional. Some looked fresh and clean, others were painted over but still visible underneath, and a few were so old the wood had darkened around them. I checked at least 20 houses on my street and the next one over, and every single one had it. Mine didn't, which suddenly made me feel exposed, like my house was advertising that I didn't belong there yet. I spent the rest of the week avoiding Dorothy and her crew, which turned out to be harder than expected in a gated community. They seemed to be everywhere, always walking in pairs with their vests and walkie-talkies, always taking notes on those leather notebooks. On Wednesday, I was coming home from work when I saw Eugene and another watch member standing in front of my house, just staring at my mailbox. When they saw me pulling into my driveway, they waved like nothing was weird about 2 old men examining my property at 6 in the evening. Eugene actually walked over to my car window and asked if I'd had a chance to review the packet, reminding me that Friday was the deadline to respond. His breath smelled like mothballs and something medicinal, and he stood way too close to my car door, basically trapping me until I promised I'd look at it that night. Friday came and I still hadn't given Dorothy an answer, mostly because the whole thing gave me the creeps, and I figured they'd just leave me alone if I ignored them long enough. Around 7 that evening, right when their regular meeting would be starting, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Dorothy standing there alone. No smile this time, just this blank expression that made her look like a completely different person. I didn't answer, just stayed quiet and waited for her to leave. She rang the bell 2 more times, then knocked with this slow, methodical rhythm that went on for about 30 seconds. Then she spoke, loud enough that I could hear her clearly through the door, saying that my absence was noted and that the community was disappointed in my lack of participation. She used that exact word, disappointed, drawing it out like she was talking to a misbehaving child. After she finally left, I watched through my window as she walked down my driveway and met up with the rest of the watch group who had been waiting by the street the entire time. They huddled together for a minute, all of them looking back at my house, then dispersed in different directions like they were following some predetermined route. That night, I couldn't sleep well, kept hearing noises outside, footsteps on the sidewalk, whispers that might have been the wind or might have been something else. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and went to check my security camera footage from earlier, just to make sure I wasn't being paranoid. What I saw made me wish I'd never bought this house. Starting at exactly midnight, there were 12 people standing at the end of my driveway, all wearing those yellow reflective vests, all facing my house, completely motionless for 1 hour and 13 minutes before they all turned and walked away at the same time. Saturday morning, I called the security company that managed the gates, trying to report what happened without sounding completely insane. The woman on the phone, who sounded bored and half asleep, told me that the Neighborhood Watch was a sanctioned group with full authority to patrol the community at any hour. When I pushed back, saying that standing in my driveway at midnight wasn't patrolling, she got quiet for a moment, then said something that chilled me more than seeing those people on my camera. She said that according to their records, I was already a registered member of the Neighborhood Watch as of Friday night, and that my initiation period would last 90 days. I told her I never signed up for anything, never agreed to join, but she insisted their records showed my verbal consent was given to Dorothy at 7:15 the previous evening, right around the time she was knocking on my door that I never answered. I spent the rest of Saturday researching Westbrook Gardens online, trying to find anyone else who'd had similar experiences, but every review was glowing. Every social media post showed happy families and community barbecues. The only odd thing I found was a death notice from 2015 about a resident named Andrew Garrett who had died in a house fire, specifically noted as living at my exact address. More searching revealed that in the past 20 years, my specific house had changed owners 7 times, which seemed excessive even for a transient area. Each previous owner had lived there less than a year, and I couldn't find any of them online afterward, like they just vanished after moving out. That afternoon, while I was deep in this rabbit hole of research, my doorbell rang again, but this time it was just a package delivery, except I hadn't ordered anything. Inside the package was a yellow reflective vest with my last name already printed on the back, a leather-bound notebook exactly like the ones they all carried, a walkie-talkie preset to Channel 7, and a small wood-carving tool with a note that simply said, "For your mailbox, complete by Monday." The precision of the threat hidden in that mundane instruction made me realize I was dealing with something far more organized and dangerous than a group of bored retirees. That night, I started packing essential items into my car, planning to stay at a hotel until I could figure out what to do. Maybe contact a lawyer or even the police outside the community. But when I tried to leave around 10 that night, the security gate wouldn't open. Harold, the guard from my first day, walked over to my car with that same strange squint and informed me that new watch members weren't permitted to leave the community during their initiation period, except for work-related purposes, and only then with written documentation of their employment schedule. I abandoned my car and walked back to my house, my mind racing through options that all seemed equally useless against whatever this was. The moment I got inside, I called my brother in Arizona, told him everything, and asked him to come get me, to bring the police if necessary. He said he'd drive through the night and be there by morning. I stayed up all night with every light in my house on, baseball bat in hand, watching those security cameras like my life depended on it. At exactly midnight, they came again, but this time there were at least 20 of them, maybe more, all standing in that same perfect formation at the end of my driveway. Dorothy was in front this time, and even through the grainy camera footage, I could see she was holding something that looked like a folder or clipboard, moving her mouth like she was reading something out loud to the others. My brother arrived at 7:30 Sunday morning with 2 cops from the county sheriff's department, and that's when everything finally broke open. The guards at the gate tried to refuse them entry, citing community bylaws, but the cops weren't having any of it and threatened to arrest Harold for obstruction. Once they got to my house and I showed them the security footage, things moved fast. Turns out the FBI had been monitoring Westbrook Gardens for 2 years, suspecting it was some kind of cult that used the homeowners association as a front. The whole neighborhood watch thing was their recruitment method, and those who refused to join after buying property there would face increasing harassment until they either joined or abandoned their homes, which the group would then buy through shell companies and resell to new potential members. The symbols, the midnight gatherings, the 90-day initiation period, it was all part of their indoctrination process. By noon, there were federal agents everywhere, arresting Dorothy and 43 other residents, including Harold and most of the watch group I'd met. They found detailed records in Dorothy's house showing 8 previous owners of my house who had all fled within their first year, and Andrew Garrett, the one who died in the fire, had apparently been trying to expose them to law enforcement. I gave my statement, packed everything I could fit in my brother's truck, and left that afternoon, not even bothering to properly close on selling the house, just wanting to get as far away as possible. The FBI agent handling my case called me a month later to say I'd likely saved myself from something much worse, as they'd found evidence of financial crimes, identity theft, and what he carefully called other concerning activities that he couldn't discuss. I took a massive financial loss on that house, but I'm alive, living in a normal apartment with normal neighbors who don't wear matching vests or stand in my driveway at midnight. And honestly, that's worth more than any dream house could ever be. When I moved into that cul-de-sac, it felt like stepping into one of those two perfect postcards you find in realtor offices. Every house looked nearly identical: beige paint, trimmed hedges, wreaths that changed with the season. I had been looking for somewhere quiet after ending a long-term relationship and quitting my job in the city. The idea of starting fresh somewhere peaceful sounded like exactly what I needed. The first morning after unpacking, I woke up to a knock on the door and found a woman in her 50s holding a casserole dish big enough to feed 6 people. She introduced herself as Mrs. Hayworth from across the street and said the neighbors were so thrilled to have me join their little community. That afternoon, 3 more people stopped by. There was a couple named Gina and Mark who lived next door, both wearing matching aprons from some local barbecue event, and an older man named Earl, who seemed to be in charge of the neighborhood watch. They all repeated the same line in slightly different tones. "We like to keep everyone close around here." At the time, I thought it was just small-town friendliness. They talked about a monthly potluck at the end of every month and insisted I come. Even when I said I was still settling in, they assured me they'd make room. It was hard not to feel a little pressured, but I told myself it was harmless. Within a week, I noticed something strange about how synchronized the neighborhood seemed. Trash cans rolled out at the exact same time. Lawns got mowed in perfect unison, right down to the sound of engines starting within seconds of each other. Even their mailboxes looked recently polished. I figured they were just the kind of people who took pride in appearances, but the more I watched, the more it felt rehearsed. Every time I pulled out of my driveway, at least one of them happened to be outside, waving, smiling, pretending to garden. It started to feel less like coincidence and more like surveillance. The first potluck came sooner than I expected. The whole cul-de-sac turned into a parade of folding tables, fairy lights, and slow cookers. Everyone brought something homemade and stood in a perfect circle like it was choreographed. When I showed up with a store-bought pie, a few people chuckled softly, not unkindly, but just enough to make me feel out of place. Mrs. Hayworth clapped me on the back and said, "You'll get the hang of it soon enough." That night, as I helped clean up, I caught Gina whispering something to Mark while glancing in my direction. She smiled when our eyes met. A little too wide, a little too long. After that night, the friendliness intensified. Whenever I went for a walk, someone would appear by chance. Earl would be sweeping his driveway, Mark would be trimming hedges, or Gina would step out just to water plants that were already soaked. Once I drove to a grocery store 2 towns over and came back to find a pie on my doorstep with a note that said, "We missed you today." The handwriting looked familiar. Neat loops like Mrs. Hayworth's, but the signature was unsigned. I told myself they were just trying to be kind, but the way they always knew where I had been made my chest feel tight every time I turned into that street. About a month later, I was coming home late from a weekend trip. Every house was dark except mine, where my porch light flickered even though I had never left it on. The motion sensor light across the street blinked too, as if reacting to something I couldn't see. As I stepped out of my car, I heard faint laughter, not loud but close enough to carry through the hedges. When I turned around, all the curtains in Earl's house were drawn except one narrow slit, and behind it, a shadow moved. I stood there for a while, pretending to look for my keys, waiting for whoever was watching to move away. The shadow didn't. It just stayed there, still, like it was waiting for me to go inside first. The next morning, I found a stack of flyers taped neatly to my front door. Each one was identical. Neighborhood potluck, attendance encouraged. What unsettled me most was that my name had been written by hand at the bottom of each flyer, in different handwriting. One looked like Earl's, another like Gina's, and one even had the same perfect loops as Mrs. Hayworth's notes. I tore them all down and threw them in the trash, but later that day, as I took out the bin, the flyers were back, folded neatly on top of the lid. Someone had been on my property again. That night, I locked every door and window before going to bed. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on my porch. The boards creaked in a slow, measured rhythm. One step, a pause, then another. I held my breath, too scared to move. After a few moments, the sound stopped, followed by the faint scrape of something sliding under my door. I waited until morning to check. On the floor lay an envelope, unmarked, sealed with tape. Inside was a single sheet of paper, every neighbor's handwriting combined into one chilling sentence. "We're so happy you finally fit in." I packed a bag that morning, convinced I was leaving. But before I could load my car, Mrs. Hayworth appeared on the sidewalk with her usual calm smile. She said she noticed my light had been on late and wanted to check in. Behind her, Earl leaned on his mailbox, pretending to read the paper. Gina waved from her porch. It was as if they had all appeared at once, positioned in a triangle around me. I forced a smile and told her I was visiting family. She tilted her head and said, "Good, family's important here." Then she gestured toward the envelope still on my porch. "We're so glad you got our note." That night, I checked into a cheap motel 15 miles away. When I turned on the television, a local commercial played, an advertisement for the Crestfield Homeowners Association, showing the same street I had just left. Everyone was there, smiling and waving, standing in front of their houses. For a split second, I thought I saw myself too. Same clothes, same hair, standing among them and smiling like I belonged. The screen glitched, and when it cleared, my image was gone. I called the police the next morning to request a welfare check on the neighborhood. The officer I spoke to said there was no record of a Crestfield court in that area, only a wooded lot with an old access road that hadn't been maintained for years. I even drove back to confirm it myself, and he was right. There was nothing there but overgrown grass and cracked pavement leading into the trees. No houses, no mailboxes, no neighbors. Just silence. I have since moved twice, and I still find things in my mailbox that I never ordered. Birthday cards signed by people I never met. Grocery flyers from a town that doesn't exist. The most recent envelope arrived last week. No return address. Inside was a short note written in the same mixture of handwritings as before. "We're so happy you never left." Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My sister had just given birth to twins when everything started falling apart. It was a Friday in early March 2024, and I remember being on the phone with her, laughing about how she had not slept in 4 days, when my doorbell rang. I was living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Albuquerque, New Mexico, working as a project manager for a construction company. At 34, my life had settled into a comfortable routine. Wake up at 6, hit the gym, work until 5, come home to my golden retriever Murphy, and spend most weekends helping my dad restore his old Chevy truck. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, nothing that would ever make me think I needed to look twice at strangers or check my locks more than once. The 2 men standing at my door wore dark suits and carried themselves with that stiff posture you see in movies about government agents. I told my sister I would call her back, and I never did finish that conversation the way I intended. The taller one introduced himself as Special Agent Novak, and his partner, a woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes, was Agent Brennan. They asked if they could come inside, and something about the way Brennan scanned the street behind her made me step aside without asking questions. They sat on my couch, declined water, And then Novak pulled out a folder that would change everything I thought I knew about my own life. He explained that the FBI had been investigating a dark web marketplace, one of those sites where people supposedly hire hitmen, though most of them are scams designed to steal cryptocurrency from desperate or deranged customers. A massive data breach had exposed thousands of requests, and my name had appeared in one of them. Not as the person hiring, Novak clarified, watching my face carefully. As the target. Someone had uploaded photographs of my apartment building, my car, my morning running route through the park 3 blocks away, and had paid nearly $8,000 in Bitcoin to have me killed. I asked them if this was some kind of joke. Novak opened the folder and spread the photographs across my coffee table, and I felt the room tilt sideways. There was my Subaru Outback parked in its usual spot, taken from across the street. There was the entrance to my building, the potted cactus my neighbor keeps by the door clearly visible. There was me, actually me, walking Murphy through Coronado Park, wearing the blue windbreaker I bought last winter. The angle suggested someone had been sitting on one of the benches near the playground, maybe 50 feet away, pointing a phone or camera directly at me while I threw a tennis ball for my dog. The timestamp on that photo was February 12th, less than a month before the agents showed up at my door. I kept staring at my own face in that image, trying to remember that specific morning, trying to recall if I had noticed anyone watching. But I could not remember anything unusual. That was the worst part. Someone had been close enough to capture the stubble on my jaw, and I had walked right past them without a single alarm going off in my head. Agent Brennan asked me if I had any enemies. The question almost made me laugh, because who actually has enemies outside of crime dramas and true crime podcasts? I told her I could not think of anyone who would want me dead. No bitter ex-girlfriends, no business disputes, no family feuds over inheritance or property. My life was aggressively ordinary. Novak then asked if I had ever used the dark web, ever accessed any illegal marketplaces, ever purchased drugs or weapons or anything else through anonymous channels. I told him no. Absolutely not, and I meant it. I barely understood how cryptocurrency worked, let alone how to navigate hidden corners of the internet. He nodded slowly, then explained that the account used to place the hit request had been created using my name, my email address, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. Whoever did this had not just wanted me dead, they had wanted it to look like I had somehow ordered the hit on myself, like some elaborate suicide scheme or insurance fraud that made no sense to anyone, least of all me. The agent stayed for almost 2 hours, asking about my coworkers, my neighbors, my family, anyone who might have access to my personal information. They wanted to know about my daily habits, whether I varied my routine, whether I had noticed anyone following me or any strange vehicles parked near my home. I answered everything as best I could, but my mind kept drifting back to those photographs. The person who took them had been patient. They had studied me, learned my schedule, figured out exactly where I would be and when. This was not some random act by a stranger who picked my name out of a phone book. This was methodical, planned, almost professional in its execution. Before they left, Novak gave me his card and told me to call immediately if anything unusual happened. He also suggested I vary my routine, maybe stay with family for a while, consider installing a security system if I did not already have one. Brennan added, almost as an afterthought, that the marketplace had been a scam. No actual hitmen, just criminals collecting money and disappearing. That should have been reassuring. It was not. I called in sick to work the next day and spent the morning on my laptop, searching my own name obsessively, trying to figure out how someone could have gathered so much information about me. I checked my credit reports for signs of identity theft and found nothing unusual. I scrolled through my social media accounts, Instagram mostly, a Facebook I barely used, looking for anything that might explain how a stranger knew my running route or what time I left for work. My posts were mundane, unremarkable, the kind of content everyone shares without thinking twice. A picture of Murphy at the dog park, a sunset from my apartment balcony, a plate of tacos from my favorite restaurant downtown. Nothing that should have made me a target. Nothing that revealed enough about my schedule for someone to track my movements with such precision. By noon, I had convinced myself that maybe this was all connected to a data breach I did not know about. Some hacker selling personal information in bulk, and I had simply been unlucky enough to catch the attention of someone unstable. That theory held together for exactly 6 hours, until I checked my mailbox and found a plain white envelope with no return address and no postage. Just my name printed in neat block letters. Inside was a single photograph. Me again, but this time sitting at a booth inside Frontier Restaurant, a place I had eaten at exactly once in the past month, on a Saturday afternoon when I met an old college friend passing through town. The photo was taken from somewhere near the entrance, probably through the window, and it captured me mid-laugh, a half-eaten burrito on the plate in front of me. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a single sentence in the same neat handwriting. "You should chew slower." I read those words maybe 15 times, trying to make sense of them, trying to understand what kind of person watches a stranger eat lunch and then delivers a cryptic message about chewing speed. My first instinct was to call Agent Novak, and I did, leaving a frantic voicemail because he did not pick up. My second instinct was to walk through my apartment checking every window lock, every door, every possible entry point. Murphy followed me from room to room, wagging his tail like this was some new game, completely unaware that his owner was quietly losing his grip on reality. I barely slept that night, sitting up in bed with the lights on, listening to every creak and groan of the building settling around me. Novak called me back the following morning and asked me to bring the envelope and photograph to the FBI field office downtown. I drove there with the evidence sealed in a plastic bag, checking my rearview mirror every 30 seconds like I expected to see someone tailing me. At the office, Brennan examined the photograph while Novak took notes, both of them wearing that carefully neutral expression that cops and agents must learn in training. They told me they would dust for fingerprints, analyze the handwriting, check security cameras in the area around my apartment building. But I could tell from their voices that they did not expect to find much. Whoever was doing this knew how to avoid leaving traces. Brennan asked me again if I could think of anyone at all, who might have a reason to frighten me like this. An ex-partner, a former friend, a co-worker I might have offended without realizing it. I mentioned a few names, people I had minor conflicts with over the years, but none of them seemed remotely capable of this level of obsession. She wrote down the names anyway and promised to look into them, but her tone suggested she was going through the motions more than expecting a breakthrough. I took 2 weeks off work after that. My boss was understanding when I explained there was a security situation, though I kept the details vague because I did not know how to summarize what was happening without sounding paranoid or crazy. I installed cameras around my apartment, 2 covering the front door, 1 on the balcony, 1 in the living room pointed at the main entrance. I changed my locks and added a deadbolt. I started parking in different spots each day and taking alternate routes whenever I left the building. Murphy and I stopped going to Coronado Park entirely, instead driving 20 minutes to a different part of town where I could walk him without feeling like prey in an open field. Every stranger became suspicious. The woman reading a book on a bench, the guy in the pickup truck parked across the street, the jogger who passed me twice on the same path. I analyzed faces, memorized license plates, looked for patterns that might reveal who was watching. The paranoia was exhausting, but I could not turn it off, not when I knew for certain that someone out there had documented my life in photographs and decided I was worth $8,000 dead. The second envelope arrived exactly 1 week after the first. Same handwriting, same lack of postage. This time the photograph showed my apartment building at night, taken from the parking lot, with my living room window circled in red marker. The lights were on in the photo, and if I looked closely I could make out the shape of myself standing near the kitchen counter, probably cooking dinner, completely unaware that someone was standing in the darkness below with a camera aimed at my home. The message on the back read, "New locks won't help." I remember sitting on my kitchen floor after reading that, my back against the cabinets, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. This person had been there. They had stood in my parking lot, maybe 100 feet from where I was at that moment, and they knew I had changed my locks. That meant they were still watching, still paying attention to every adjustment I made. The cameras, the new deadbolt, the varied parking spots, none of it mattered because they were always close enough to notice. I called Novak again and he answered this time, his voice tired and apologetic. The fingerprint analysis had come back empty. The security cameras near my mailbox had been angled wrong, capturing nothing useful. They were still investigating, he assured me, but there was nothing new to report. I decided I could not stay in that apartment anymore. My dad lived about 40 minutes outside the city, in a small house on 3 acres of land, with good sight lines, and a German shepherd named Duke who barked at anyone who came within 50 feet of the property. I packed a bag, loaded Murphy into the car, and drove out there on a Sunday afternoon, telling myself it was just temporary, just until the FBI figured something out or the stalker got bored and moved on to someone else. My dad did not ask too many questions when I showed up, just handed me a beer and said I could stay as long as I needed. He was a retired electrician, practical and calm, the kind of man who fixed problems instead of worrying about them. That night, sitting on his back porch watching the sun go down over the desert, I felt something close to safe for the first time in weeks. The property was isolated, hard to approach without being noticed, and Duke patrolled the perimeter like he was bred for exactly this purpose. I let myself believe just for a moment that maybe I had outmaneuvered whoever was doing this. Maybe distance was the answer. Maybe they would lose interest now that I was no longer following my predictable routine in the city. That belief lasted until Wednesday morning. I had just finished breakfast and was helping my dad replace a fence post in the back pasture when I noticed something stuck to the windshield of my Subaru, parked in the driveway near the house. At first I thought it was a flyer, some advertisement that had blown in from the road, but as I got closer my legs almost gave out beneath me. It was another envelope, same white paper, same block letters spelling my name. Inside was a photograph of my father's house, taken from the road at the edge of the property, with the kitchen window visible and 2 figures standing inside, me and my dad, drinking coffee that very morning. The message on the back was longer this time. Family is nice, shame to involve them. I stood there in the driveway, the desert wind pulling at my shirt, and I understood something with horrible clarity. This person was not going to stop. They had followed me 40 minutes outside the city to a location I had never mentioned to anyone except my sister and my boss. They had found me within days, and now they were threatening my father, a 67-year-old man who had nothing to do with any of this, whose only crime was letting his son hide in his home. I told my dad everything that afternoon. He listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each detail, and when I finished he walked to the hall closet and came back with a shotgun I had not seen since I was a teenager. He loaded it calmly and set it by the back door, then called his neighbor, a retired sheriff named Hector who lived about a mile down the road. Hector came over within the hour, listened to the whole story again, and suggested we set up a watch schedule. He had trail cameras on his own property for tracking coyotes and offered to install a few around my dad's land, motion-activated units that would send alerts to his phone whenever anything larger than a jackrabbit moved through the frame. By nightfall, we had 6 cameras positioned along the road and the perimeter fence, covering every angle of approach. Hector also made some calls to friends still working in law enforcement, people who might be able to push the investigation forward in ways the FBI field office had not managed. I felt like I was living inside a siege, my elderly father and his neighbor arming themselves against an invisible enemy who left photographs instead of bullets. The break came 4 days later, and it did not come from the FBI or from Hector's contacts. It came from my sister, Caroline, who called me in a panic because she had received an envelope too. Same handwriting, same block letters, delivered to her home in Denver where she was recovering from giving birth to her twins. The photograph inside showed me standing in my dad's driveway, holding the previous envelope, my face frozen in that moment of realization. But Caroline, being Caroline, did something I had not thought to do. She checked her doorbell camera footage and found a clear image of the person who had placed the envelope in her mailbox. It was a man, average height, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, his face partially visible as he turned away from the camera. She sent the image to me, and I forwarded it immediately to Agent Novak, who ran it through their facial recognition database. The match came back within 24 hours. His name was Theodore Sills, 41 years old, a former IT contractor who had worked briefly for my construction company almost 3 years earlier. I had never spoken to him directly, had no memory of his face, had probably passed him in the hallway without a second glance. But according to the FBI's investigation, Sills had been fired for accessing employee files without authorization, and somewhere in his twisted mind, he had decided that I was responsible for his termination. They arrested Theodore Sills at his apartment in Las Cruces on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after my sister captured his face on camera. Inside his home, they found what Novak later described as a shrine. Hundreds of photographs of me printed and pinned to a corkboard, handwritten notes detailing my schedule going back almost 18 months, maps of Albuquerque with my regular locations circled in red, and a journal filled with rambling entries about how I had ruined his career and deserved to suffer. He had never intended to actually kill me, the agents concluded. The dark web hit request was theater, a way to terrify me while maintaining plausible deniability, a game designed by someone who wanted to watch me unravel from a safe distance. Sills was charged with stalking, criminal harassment, identity theft, and making terroristic threats. He is currently awaiting trial, denied bail after a judge determined he posed an ongoing risk. I moved back to my apartment eventually, though I still flinch when I check my mailbox, and I probably always will. My dad kept the trail cameras, says they help him sleep better at night. Caroline installed a security system and taught her husband how to check the footage every evening before bed. We are all different now, more careful, more aware of how easily a stranger can insert themselves into your life without you ever noticing. I still do not understand why Sills chose me specifically, why my face in a hallway 3 years ago sparked something so dark and obsessive in his mind. Some questions do not have answers that make sense. Some people carry damage that the rest of us cannot see until it spills over and stains everyone around them. All I know for certain is that for 3 weeks in the spring of 2024, I learned what it feels like to be hunted by someone who knows everything about you, and I will never take my ordinary, boring, predictable life for granted again. Curiosity has always been my worst trait. My wife Bethany used to joke that I would be the guy who dies first in a horror movie, because I just had to open that door, just had to check what was making that noise. She was not wrong. By the time I graduated college back in 2015, I had already gone through 3 laptops trying to learn about things most people never think about, how to access parts of the internet that do not show up on Google, what kind of markets exist in the shadows, who sells what to whom when there are no rules. It was never about buying anything. I worked as an IT consultant for a mid-sized insurance company in Milwaukee, made decent money, paid my taxes. But at night, after Bethany went to sleep, I would sit in our spare bedroom with a VPN running and Tor open, just exploring, just looking. That was what I told myself anyway. I was a tourist in someone else's nightmare, and tourists always think they can leave whenever they want. It was a Thursday in March of 2022 when I found it. The temperature outside had dropped to single digits, and our old Victorian house creaked and groaned against the wind like it was trying to warn me about something. Bethany was visiting her mother in Arizona for the week, so I had the place to myself, just me, the hum of my computer fans, and a mug of cold coffee I kept forgetting to drink. I had been browsing a forum that specialized in exotic animal trade. The kind of place where people discussed buying tiger cubs or rare birds smuggled out of South America. Disgusting stuff, but nothing I had not seen before in my years of digital wandering. There was a thread buried near the bottom of the page with a strange title: Premium Cuts, Verified Suppliers Only. At first glance, it seemed like another subsection about rare meats, bush meat, endangered species, that sort of illegal but ultimately unsurprising content. I clicked it without thinking much, the same way you might click any link that catches your eye. That single click would become the thing I regret most in my entire life. The forum looked different from the main page I'd been browsing. The layout was stripped down, almost primitive. Black background, gray text, no images visible at first. There were maybe 40 or 50 usernames listed as active members, each one a string of random letters and numbers that meant nothing on their own. The first few posts seemed to confirm my initial assumption. People discussing the logistics of shipping product across state lines, debates about the quality of different cuts, complaints about delivery times and packaging. Someone with the username X7R4N mentioned that their last shipment from the farm in Nevada had arrived in poor condition, and another user responded with advice about temperature control during transit. I scrolled through these conversations with the detached interest of someone watching a documentary about a world they would never enter. These people were criminals, sure, but they were just poachers and smugglers dealing in animal parts. Sad and illegal, but not exactly shocking. Then I noticed the way they talked about weights and measurements, and something in my chest began to tighten. The weights were wrong for animals. Someone requested a young female, preferably under 90 pounds, healthy teeth. Another user offered 2 males, early development stage from the Midwest collection point. A moderator posted guidelines about how to photograph inventory without showing identifying features, and specified that faces should be obscured but body conditions should be visible for quality assessment. I read those words 3 times before my brain allowed me to understand what they actually meant. These people were not talking about animals. They were not talking about exotic meats or bushmeat, or anything that had ever walked on 4 legs. I pushed back from my desk so hard that my chair slammed into the wall behind me. My mouth had gone completely dry, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like a drum that someone was playing too fast. I wanted to close the browser. I wanted to shut down my computer and go downstairs and watch television and pretend I had never seen any of this. But I did not do any of those things. Instead, I kept reading. There was an archived section of the forum that contained posts dating back several years. The moderators had organized everything into categories with labels that made my stomach churn: available inventory, successful deliveries, supplier reviews, and one folder simply titled Retired Stock. I clicked on the archives with the kind of compulsion that I imagine drives people to look at car accidents on the highway. You know you should not. You know it will haunt you. But some part of your brain needs to see it anyway. The oldest posts used even more coded language than the recent ones, referring to livestock and breeding potential and shelf life. But as I read through months and months of conversations, I started to recognize patterns. Suppliers talked about acquisition costs in certain geographic areas. They mentioned that product from rural regions was easier to obtain than from cities because fewer people noticed when someone went missing. One user with the handle Farmhand61 complained that the young ones from the foster system were becoming harder to source because of increased oversight. I felt bile rising in my throat as I read that sentence, and I had to close my eyes for a full minute before I could continue. The thing that finally broke something inside me was a photograph. Most of the images on the forum were blocked or deleted, replaced with text that said, "Image removed for security." But in one archived thread from 2018, someone had posted a picture that the moderators had apparently missed. It showed a room with concrete walls and a drain in the floor, the kind of industrial setup you might see in a meat processing plant. There were no people in the photograph, nothing explicitly violent or graphic, Just that empty room with its harsh fluorescent lighting and a metal table in the center, positioned directly over the drain. The table had leather straps attached to its sides. Below the photograph, a user had commented, "New facility looking clean. Should increase processing capacity by 40% this quarter." I stared at that image until my vision blurred, trying to convince myself that it could be something else, anything else. A veterinary clinic, a butcher shop, some kind of legitimate industrial space that just happened to look like a scene from my worst nightmares. But I knew what I was looking at. I knew exactly what that room was designed for, and I knew that real human beings had been brought there against their will. I should have stopped there. I should have taken screenshots, contacted the FBI, and walked away from my computer forever. But something else had caught my attention in the archived threads, references to specific locations and dates that seemed too detailed to be random. A user called Transit9 had posted about a pickup near a truck stop outside of Tucson in November of 2017. Another mentioned a batch that had been processed in a rural area of eastern Missouri the following spring. These were not vague comments. They included highway numbers, approximate mileage from major cities, and sometimes even weather conditions on the day of the operations. My hands moved to my keyboard almost without my permission, and I opened a new browser window, a regular one this time, not running through Tor. I typed the date and location from the Tucson Post into a news search. It took me less than 30 seconds to find an article about a missing 17-year-old girl named Brittany Saunders, who had last been seen at a gas station along that exact stretch of highway, just 2 days before the forum post was made. Her case was still unsolved, her family was still looking for her, and someone on that forum had referred to her as fresh product, minimal transport damage. I spent the next 4 hours cross-referencing forum posts with missing persons databases. By the time the sun started coming up through my office window, I had matched 7 different discussions to real disappearances. A 19-year-old boy from rural Kansas who vanished while walking home from his night shift at a warehouse. Twin sisters from a small town in Minnesota who went missing during a family camping trip. A homeless woman in her 20s whose case had barely made the local news in Albuquerque. Each time, the forum posts lined up with the locations and time frames in ways that could not be coincidental. The users talked about these people the way restaurant suppliers might discuss shipments of beef or chicken, quality ratings, complaints about damaged goods, arguments about pricing. One thread contained a detailed review of a supplier who operated somewhere in the Great Lakes region, praising his ability to acquire clean product with no prior documentation. I realized with a sickening clarity that they meant people who would not be missed. Runaways, homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, people whose disappearances would never make national headlines, whose faces would never appear on primetime news segments. The system was designed to target the invisible, and it had been operating for years right beneath the surface of the world I thought I knew. By mid-morning, I had compiled a document with everything I had found. Screenshots of forum posts, links to news articles about the missing persons cases, a timeline showing how the dates matched up. My eyes burned from staring at the screen all night, and my body ached from sitting in the same position for hours without moving. I had not eaten anything since dinner the previous evening, but the thought of food made me physically ill. I saved the document to an encrypted folder, and then sat there for a long time, trying to figure out what to do next. Calling the local police seemed pointless. This was clearly something that spanned multiple states, maybe even multiple countries. The FBI had a tip line for crimes like this, but I had no idea how to explain what I had found without also explaining how I had found it. Would they take me seriously, or would they treat me as a suspect? I had spent years poking around in corners of the internet where illegal things happened. My browsing history alone could probably get me flagged by a dozen different agencies. But I kept thinking about Brittany Saunders, about her photograph in that news article. A senior portrait with a bright smile and a blue background. The kind of picture that ends up on missing posters and milk cartons. Someone on that forum had called her fresh product. Someone had weighed her like meat and assigned her a price. I picked up my phone and dialed the FBI tip line before I could talk myself out of it. The woman who answered sounded tired, like she had already taken 100 calls that morning and expected 100 more before lunch. I told her I had found something online that I believed was connected to human trafficking. She asked me a series of questions in a flat, professional voice. What website? How did I access it? What specifically did I observe? I answered as clearly as I could, though my voice kept cracking in places where I had to describe the content of the forum posts. When I mentioned that I had matched some of the discussions to real missing persons cases, her tone shifted slightly. Not quite interested, but more alert. She took down my name and contact information and told me that someone from the cyber division would be in touch within 48 hours. Then she thanked me for calling, and the line went dead. I sat there holding my phone for several minutes, unsure whether I had just done something brave or something incredibly stupid. The forum was still open on my computer screen, those gray letters glowing against the black background like a warning I had ignored. I closed the browser without looking at it again and went downstairs to make coffee, my legs unsteady beneath me like I had just stepped off a boat after weeks at sea. The FBI did call back, though it took them 5 days instead of 48 hours. A man named Special Agent Thornberry asked me to come to their field office in downtown Milwaukee to give a formal statement and hand over the files I had compiled. I spent 3 hours in a gray room with fluorescent lights, answering questions from 2 agents who treated me with a mixture of professional courtesy and barely concealed suspicion. They wanted to know how I had accessed the forum, what other dark websites I had visited, whether I had ever purchased anything illegal online. I answered everything truthfully, including the parts that made me look bad. When I finally showed them my document, the matched cases, the timeline, the screenshots, their expressions changed. Agent Thornberry leaned forward and studied my laptop screen for a long time without speaking. His partner, a woman with short gray hair and reading glasses, excused herself from the room and did not come back for almost an hour. When she returned, she told me that some of the information I had found corroborated details from an ongoing investigation that I was not authorized to know about. She could not tell me anything more, but she thanked me for coming forward and said that my materials would be extremely valuable. I left the FBI building feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and replaced them with cold air. 3 months later, I saw a news story about a federal raid on a compound in rural Nebraska. 17 people were arrested and charged with various crimes related to human trafficking, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. The article did not mention anything about a forum or the dark web, and it did not reference any of the specific cases I had found in my research. But one of the photographs showed officers escorting a man in handcuffs, whose face was partially obscured by a jacket pulled over his head. Below the image, a caption identified him only as a key figure in the trafficking network believed to have operated across multiple states. I stared at that photograph for a long time, wondering if he was one of the usernames I had seen on the forum, Farmhand61 or Transit9, or any of the others who had discussed human beings like cuts of meat. I never found out for certain. The FBI never contacted me again after that initial meeting, and I never tried to access that forum or anything like it ever again. I deleted Tor from my computer, canceled my VPN subscription, and told Bethany that I was done with my late-night explorations of the internet's dark corners. She did not ask why, and I did not offer an explanation. Some things are too heavy to share, even with the person you love most in the world. To this day, I still think about Brittany Saunders and the others whose names I found in those archives. I think about the ones I did not find, the ones who disappeared without anyone ever noticing. And sometimes late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder how many forums like that one are still out there, operating quietly in the shadows while the rest of us scroll through our phones and pretend the world is a safer place than it actually is. My buddy Owen and I had just finished our junior year in the cybersecurity program at a small college in Michigan when we came up with what we thought was a brilliant idea for our summer research project. We were both 23, way too confident in our own cleverness, and completely obsessed with studying how criminals operated online. The plan was simple. We would create a fake service on the dark web, something that offered vague problem-solving for people who needed things handled discreetly. We figured we would attract a bunch of scammers trying to scam us, maybe some curious people poking around, and we could document the whole thing for a paper on criminal psychology and online behavior. Owen had the technical skills to set up the hidden service, and I handled the writing, creating this mysterious persona that promised results without ever specifying what kind of results. We thought we were so smart, two kids playing pretend in a world we did not actually understand. We launched the site on a Saturday morning in June 2023, sitting in Owen's cramped apartment with the blinds closed and energy drinks scattered everywhere. The interface was deliberately minimal, just a black background with white text, a contact form, and a Bitcoin wallet address. We called it the Fixer because it sounded generic enough to attract attention without being too specific. For the first 3 days, nothing happened. We got a couple of spam messages, one guy asking if we sold drugs, and someone who just typed random letters into the form. Owen and I joked about how anticlimactic the whole thing was, how we had built this elaborate trap and caught nothing but bots and teenagers. We were actually considering shutting it down and pivoting to something else when the first real message came through on Tuesday night. I remember Owen calling me over to his laptop, his voice different than usual, and when I read what was on the screen, neither of us said anything for a long time. The message was detailed in a way that made my throat tighten. Someone with the username NeedHelp99 had written 3 paragraphs about a woman named Jennifer Ashworth who lived on Crescent Drive in a town called Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The message included her daily schedule, what time she left for work, what car she drove, a silver Toyota Camry, and the fact that she lived alone with a small dog. The person writing wanted to know our rates for making her go away permanently, and emphasized that payment would not be an issue. They had already sent $500 worth of Bitcoin to our wallet as a show of good faith, asking us to confirm receipt and provide further instructions. Owen and I just stared at each other. This was not some edgy teenager trying to be scary. This was someone who had done research, who had watched this woman, who had real money to spend. The Bitcoin was already sitting in our wallet, and suddenly our little academic experiment felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. We did not sleep that night. Owen wanted to shut everything down immediately, delete the site, abandon the wallet, pretend none of it ever happened. But I kept thinking about Jennifer Ashworth, this random woman in Pennsylvania who had no idea that someone out there wanted her dead badly enough to pay for it. We looked her up, and she was real. I found her on social media in under 5 minutes, a dental hygienist in her early 40s who posted pictures of her garden and her terrier named Biscotti. She had a sister in Philadelphia and liked to comment on local news articles. This was an actual human being with a life, and someone had just paid us money to end it. The weight of that realization was unlike anything I had ever felt. We were not researchers anymore. We were not clever college kids running an experiment. We were 2 idiots who had stumbled into something genuinely dangerous, and we had no idea what to do next. Owen suggested we just ignore it, let the message sit there unanswered, and maybe the person would give up and move on. But by Wednesday afternoon, 2 more messages had come through, and these were worse. One was from someone asking about a business partner who had allegedly stolen money from them, wanting to know if we could arrange for the guy to have an accident that would look natural. They included the target's home address in suburban Chicago, his gym schedule, and the make and model of his car. The second message was shorter but somehow more disturbing, just a name, an age, 15, and a school address, followed by a question about whether we handled younger problems and how much extra that would cost. I actually had to get up and walk away from the computer after reading that one. I stood in Owen's kitchen with my hands pressed against the counter, trying to breathe normally, trying to process that someone out there was asking us to hurt a child. These were not hypothetical situations or dark fantasies people were typing out for shock value. These were requests with real information, real locations, real people who could be found and verified. By Thursday morning, we had received 11 messages total, and the Bitcoin wallet had grown to almost $3,000 in unsolicited deposits. Owen had not left his apartment in 2 days, and I had barely eaten anything since Tuesday. We kept going back and forth about what to do. Going to the police felt impossible, because we would have to explain that we had created an illegal service on the dark web, even if it was fake, even if we never intended to actually do anything. We could face charges ourselves, expulsion from school, maybe even federal prosecution for soliciting crimes across state lines. But staying silent meant that these people, these real people who wanted real harm done, would just find someone else to do it. Someone who would actually take their money and follow through. I remember sitting on Owen's couch at around 4 in the morning, both of us exhausted and terrified, when another notification popped up, another message, another request, another life that someone wanted erased, and all I could think was that we had opened a door we did not know how to close. Owen finally broke down on Friday. He said we had to tell someone, that he could not carry this anymore, that every time he closed his eyes he saw that 15-year-old kid whose name he had memorized without meaning to. We decided to reach out to one of our professors, a guy named Dr. Whitfield who taught network security and had done consulting work for law enforcement in the past. We figured he might know how to handle this without immediately destroying our lives. I sent him an email asking if we could meet urgently about a research situation that got out of hand, and he responded within an hour, saying to come to his office that afternoon. Walking across campus that day felt surreal. Students were throwing frisbees on the quad, laughing about summer plans, complaining about the heat. And there we were, carrying screenshots of murder requests in a folder, about to confess that we had accidentally built a marketplace for violence. I kept looking at people's faces and wondering how many of them had dark thoughts they never acted on, and how many were like the people messaging us, just waiting for the right opportunity. Dr. Whitfield listened to everything without interrupting. We showed him the messages, the wallet balance, the details people had provided about their intended victims. When we finished, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands, and for a long moment he did not say anything. Then he told us something I will never forget. He said that what we had stumbled into was not unusual, that the dark web was full of services exactly like the one we had created, and that law enforcement knew most of them were scams or honeypots. But the people sending those messages did not know that. To them, our fake service was real, and their intentions were real, and the money they sent was real. He said we had 2 options: shut everything down and hope nothing came of it, or work with him to hand the information over to the FBI through proper channels that might protect our identities. He could not promise anything, but he knew people who handled these cases. Owen and I looked at each other, and for the first time in days, I felt like maybe there was a way out of this nightmare. We agreed to let Whitfield make the calls. He told us to keep the site running for now, to not respond to any messages, and to document everything that came in. The FBI would want as much data as possible, and shutting down prematurely could spook the people who had already made contact. That weekend was the longest of my life. I went back to my own apartment, but I could not stop checking my phone, waiting for updates from Owen about new messages. They kept coming. A woman in Texas wanting her ex-husband dealt with before their custody hearing. A guy in Minnesota asking about pricing for surveillance and intimidation of a coworker. Someone offering $10,000 for a clean job on a landlord who was trying to evict them. Each message was a window into a life I never wanted to see, a person who had decided that violence was a reasonable solution to their problems. I started having trouble distinguishing between sleep and waking because the same thoughts cycled through my head constantly. How many of these people would actually go through with something if they found a real service? How many already had? On Monday, Whitfield called us back to his office and introduced us to two federal agents who had driven up from Detroit. They were calm and professional, not at all what I expected, and they treated us more like witnesses than criminals. They explained that our situation was not unique, that they had seen college students and amateur hackers stumble into similar traps before. What mattered now was cooperation. They took copies of everything: the messages, the wallet addresses, the server logs that Owen had meticulously kept. One of the agents, a woman with short gray hair whose name I never caught, told us that at least 3 of the requests we received matched ongoing investigations. Real cases with real suspects who had been looking for exactly the kind of service we pretended to offer. She said our data could help build cases against people who might otherwise never face consequences. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I just felt hollow. These were not abstract criminals. These were regular people with jobs and families who had typed out requests to have other human beings killed, and they were everywhere. The agents told us to take down the site that same day, and Owen did it right there in Whitfield's office. I watched him type the commands, watched the server go dark, and felt nothing close to closure. We were told not to discuss the case with anyone, that we might be called as witnesses if any prosecutions moved forward, and that our identities would be protected as much as possible. They thanked us for coming forward and said we had done the right thing, but those words felt empty. We had not done the right thing. We had done a stupid, reckless thing that happened to produce useful information by accident. The agents left. Whitfield told us to take care of ourselves, and Owen and I walked out of that building into the summer heat without saying a word to each other. I remember the sunlight feeling offensive somehow, too bright and too normal for what we had just been through. We parted ways at the edge of campus, and I did not see Owen again for almost 2 weeks. Neither of us knew how to talk about it. That was over a year ago now. I finished my degree, got a job at a small IT firm, and moved to a different state. Owen and I text sometimes, but we never bring up that summer. The FBI contacted me once, about 6 months after everything happened, to let me know that 2 arrests had been made in connection with information we provided. They did not give me details, just said that our cooperation had helped. I should feel good about that, I guess, but mostly I just feel different. I look at people differently now. The guy behind me in line at the grocery store, the woman walking her dog past my apartment, the coworker who complains about his divorce every day at lunch. I wonder which of them has thought about crossing a line they can never come back from. I wonder how many people out there right now are typing messages into dark corners of the internet, looking for someone to solve their problems permanently. We ran that site for less than a week, and we received over 30 requests. 30 people willing to pay money to have someone hurt or killed, and that was just our tiny fake operation in one small corner of the web. I do not sleep well anymore. I probably never will again. Most people my age spend their evenings watching television or scrolling through Facebook, but I have always been drawn to the forgotten corners of the internet. I work as a digital archivist for the county library system in Albuquerque, a job that sounds boring until you realize it gives you access to tools and knowledge that most civilians never encounter. My daughter left for college in Arizona back in 2018, the same year my husband started traveling 3 weeks out of every month for his consulting firm, and suddenly, I had more empty hours than I knew what to do with. That was when I taught myself to navigate the deep web. It began as professional curiosity. I was trying to recover old community forums that had disappeared when their servers went offline, preserving digital history that would otherwise be lost forever. I learned how to use Tor, how to read onion addresses, how to trace the ghosts of websites through mirror sites and archive services. My coworkers joked that I was becoming obsessed. They had no idea how right they were. On a Wednesday night in early March, I found something that I cannot stop thinking about even now, months later. I had been following a trail of dead links for hours, starting with an old photography forum from 2004 and bouncing between archive mirrors until I barely remembered where I had begun. That was when the page loaded, a personal blog that looked like it belonged to another era entirely. Plain white background, Times New Roman font, no header images or sidebars or any of the things modern websites have. The URL was a meaningless string of letters and numbers, the kind that gets auto-generated when someone does not bother choosing a real address. What caught my attention was the date on the most recent post, just 3 weeks earlier. Everything about the site screamed early 2000s, yet someone was still updating it. The post was titled, "Lessons from February," and I assumed it would be the usual self-help nonsense or amateur creative writing. I scrolled down and started reading, and within 30 seconds I felt my entire body go rigid in my chair. The writing style was fragmented, almost stream of consciousness, like someone jotting down thoughts without any intention of making them coherent. The first entry talked about mistakes and lessons learned, phrases that seemed innocent enough on their own. But the context was all wrong. The author wrote about someone who did not cooperate and how frustrating that had been, how it had forced a change in plans. There were references to timing, to patience, to the importance of observation. Between the blocks of text, there were photographs, not of people but of objects. A single house key on a wooden table labeled with a date and the words, "Riverside Drive, unsuccessful." A pair of running shoes, white with pink laces, photographed on what looked like a garage floor, labeled November 14th, Cedar Hills Park. A silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a butterfly, resting on a dark surface I could not identify, labeled only with a date from January. I kept scrolling, my mouth dry, telling myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe this was some kind of art project, a fictional horror blog meant to unsettle visitors. People create things like that all the time, but the deeper I went, the harder it became to convince myself this was fiction. The entries spanned almost 2 years, and they followed a pattern that made my skin prickle. The author would write about watching someone, learning their schedule, noting when they left for work and when they came home. Then there would be a gap of a few weeks, followed by a post about what went wrong or what went right. The language was clinical, detached, like someone reviewing their own performance. She was more alert than expected, had to abort. The window was a better access point than the door. Next time I need to account for neighbors who keep irregular hours. And always, there were photographs of objects. Jewelry, keys, shoes, a hairbrush, a coffee mug with a logo I did not recognize. Each one tagged with a date and a location. I found myself breathing faster, my pulse hammering in my temples. I grabbed a notebook from my desk and started writing down every location mentioned, every date, every detail I could extract from those cryptic entries. I needed to prove to myself that this was fake, that none of it matched anything real. It took me less than an hour to find the first match. One of the entries from October mentioned a location called Ridgecrest Avenue, a name I did not recognize, but that sounded local enough to search. I typed it into a regular browser along with the word "missing" and the year, and the results made me push back from my desk so hard my chair nearly tipped over. A woman named Felicity Dunn had disappeared from Ridgecrest Avenue in October of the previous year. She was 26 years old, a veterinary technician, last seen leaving her apartment complex around 7 in the morning. Her car was found parked at a trailhead 15 miles outside of town, but she was never located. The case was still open. I pulled up every news article I could find about her, scanning for details, and then I went back to the blog and read that October entry again. The author mentioned watching someone who walked a small dog every evening, someone who kept her blinds open, someone who drove a dark blue sedan. Felicity Dunn owned a Chihuahua mix named Peanut. She lived in a ground floor unit. Her missing person flyer showed her standing next to a navy blue Mazda. I sat in my chair, unable to move, reading those two sources side by side until the words blurred together. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. Ridgecrest Avenue is not an uncommon street name, and plenty of young women have small dogs and dark sedans. but something in my gut knew better. I went back to the blog and found the photograph attached to that October entry. A single silver stud earring shaped like a tiny star, resting on what looked like concrete. I searched for more images of Felicity Dunn and found an Instagram account her family had kept public as part of the search efforts. In photo after photo, she wore the same small silver stars in her ears. They had been a gift from her grandmother, according to one of the caption. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, trying to process what I had just found. Either I had stumbled onto the personal journal of someone who was fantasizing about crimes he had read about in the news, or I had found something much worse. A record. A trophy case. The private documentation of someone who was actively hunting people in my city and getting away with it. I did not sleep that night. I made coffee at 2 in the morning and sat at my kitchen table with my notebook, going through every entry on the blog and cross-referencing each location and date with local news archives. By sunrise, I had found 3 more potential matches. A woman named Iris Calloway, who vanished from a neighborhood called Sunset Terrace in August. The blog mentioned that same area and described someone who moved too quickly and noticed things she should not have noticed. A college student named Brooke Ellison who disappeared from near the university campus in December. Her backpack found abandoned in an alley behind a coffee shop. The blog had an entry from that same week about a near miss and the difficulty of working in areas with too many witnesses. And most disturbingly, a Jane Doe case from the previous spring. A body discovered in an arroyo on the outskirts of the city, never identified. The blog entry from that period talked about finishing what was started and included a photograph of a thin gold necklace with a broken clasp. Each connection I found made me feel more certain and more terrified. This was not fiction. This was not a game. Someone was documenting their crimes in a hidden corner of the internet, and I had found it by accident. The entry that finally pushed me to action was dated just 6 weeks before I discovered the site. It mentioned a location I recognized immediately, Lomas Boulevard, less than 3 miles from my own house. The author wrote about a new subject, someone they had been watching for several weeks, someone whose patterns were predictable and whose building had poor security. There was a photograph of a keychain, a small leather strap with a brass initial charm, the letter K, and a note about how easy it had been to make a copy while the subject was distracted at a laundromat. I searched for recent missing persons reports from that area and found nothing, which should have been a relief but instead filled me with dread. The blog entry was recent. The author was still watching. Whoever owned that keychain might still be alive, still going about their daily routine, completely unaware that someone had copied their key and was waiting for the right moment. I could not just sit on this information. I could not go back to my normal life and pretend I had never seen any of it, but I also had no idea what to do next, or who would even believe me. I called the Albuquerque Police Department that same morning, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I had found. The woman who answered transferred me twice before I finally reached a detective in the missing persons unit, a man named Sergeant Orozco, who listened patiently while I stumbled through my story. I told him about the blog, about the photographs of personal items, about the locations and dates that matched open cases. I gave him the names: Felicity Dunn, Iris Calloway, Brooke Ellison. I described the entry about Lomas Boulevard and the copied key. When he finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sergeant Orozco asked me how I had found this website, and I explained about my work, about the deep web, about following dead links through archive services. He asked if I had saved any of the content, and my heart sank because I had not. I had been so focused on researching the connections that I never thought to take screenshots or download the pages. He gave me his email address and asked me to send him the URL so their digital forensics team could take a look. I thanked him and hung up, already opening my laptop to retrieve the address from my browser history. The site was gone. I clicked through my history, found the exact link I had followed the night before, and watched it load into nothing but a blank page with an error message. Connection refused. I tried again, cleared my cache, restarted Tor, used a different browser. Nothing worked. The blog had vanished completely, as if it had never existed at all. I sat there staring at the error message, feeling a cold weight settle in my stomach. Whoever ran that site had either taken it down on their own or had some way of knowing when they were being watched. I emailed Sergeant Orozco anyway, sending him the URL and explaining that the page was no longer accessible. I attached my handwritten notes, everything I had documented during my sleepless night, every name and date and location I had connected. His response came 3 hours later. A polite thank you for my concern, a note that the digital forensics team had been unable to locate any content at the address I provided, and a suggestion that I might have encountered a hoax or an elaborate piece of horror fiction designed to seem realistic. He said they would keep my notes on file, but there was nothing actionable without evidence. I read that email 4 times, each time feeling more sick than before. For the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed with finding the site again. I spent every free moment retracing my steps through the deep web, following every dead link I could remember, searching for any fragment of the blog that might have been cached or mirrored somewhere. I found nothing. It was like chasing smoke. Meanwhile, I kept checking the local news, dreading the moment when a new missing person report would appear, when another woman would vanish from Lomas Boulevard or somewhere nearby. I thought about the keychain with the letter K, about the person who owned it, about the copied key sitting in some predator's pocket. I thought about knocking on doors in that neighborhood, warning strangers about a threat I could not prove, but I knew how that would look. A middle-aged woman ranting about a website nobody else had seen, sounding exactly like the kind of person people crossed the street to avoid. My husband came home from one of his trips and found me sitting in the dark at 3 in the morning, laptop open, eyes red from exhaustion. He asked me what was wrong and I tried to explain, but the words came out scattered and paranoid. He held my hand and told me I needed to step away from the computer, that I was scaring him. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was losing perspective. But I could not shake the knowledge of what I had seen. The news broke on a Sunday morning in late April. A woman named Kendra Vogel had been reported missing from her apartment on Lomas Boulevard. She was 31 years old, a physical therapist last seen by a coworker on Friday evening. Her door showed no signs of forced entry. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her family said she would never leave without telling someone, that she was not the type to just disappear. I stared at the article on my phone, reading the name over and over again. Kendra, the letter K on the keychain. He had a copy of her key. He had been inside her apartment before she even knew she was in danger. I called Sergeant Orozco immediately and left a voicemail that probably sounded unhinged. I told him about the blog entry, about the keychain, about how I had tried to warn him weeks ago. He called me back that afternoon, and this time his tone was different. He asked me to come to the station and give a formal statement. He asked if I would be willing to work with their digital forensics team to try to reconstruct my search history from that night. He did not apologize for dismissing me before, but I could hear something new in his voice, something that sounded almost like fear. I told him I would be there within the hour. The next 3 months were a blur of interviews, forensic analysis, and waiting. The police tech team managed to recover fragments of my browsing history, enough to confirm that I had accessed something on the deep web that night, though the actual content of the site remained unrecoverable. They cross-referenced my notes with their case files and found details that had never been released to the public. The specific location where Felicity Dunn's earring had been found, the broken clasp on the Jane Doe's necklace, the exact time window when Brooke Ellison had last been seen. I had no way of knowing those things unless I had seen them somewhere, and the only place I could have seen them was that blog. Sergeant Orozco stopped treating me like a nuisance and started treating me like a witness. They brought in FBI consultants who specialized in online predators, people who understood how criminals use the dark web to document and share their activities. One of them, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, told me that what I had stumbled onto was not unique, There were others out there, hiding in plain sight on forgotten corners of the internet, keeping records that no one would ever find unless they got very lucky or very unlucky. She said I was the first credible lead they had found in years. That did not make me feel any better. Kendra Vogel was found in early July, alive, in a storage unit on the edge of the city. A neighbor had reported a strange smell coming from the facility, and when police investigated, they found her dehydrated, malnourished, but breathing. She had been held there for almost 2 months. The man who took her was a 43-year-old electrician named Russell Embry, someone with no prior criminal record, someone who had lived in Albuquerque his entire life without attracting any attention. They caught him because he made a mistake. He used a credit card registered to his real name to pay for the storage unit, a lapse in judgment after years of careful planning. When they searched his house, they found a laptop with an encrypted partition containing hundreds of photographs, journal entries, and detailed notes about women he had watched, approached, and in some cases taken. The blog I had found was just one of several he maintained, rotating between addresses, deleting and recreating them whenever he sensed scrutiny. He had been doing this for over a decade. Felicity Dunn, Iris Calloway, Brooke Ellison. They found evidence connected to all of them. Some of them they found remains. I try not to think about that part too much. Russell Embry is currently awaiting trial on multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and murder. The prosecutors say it will take years to work through all the evidence, to identify every victim, to build cases strong enough to ensure he never sees the outside of a prison again. Kendra Vogel survived, but from what I have heard, she moved out of state and does not speak to anyone about what happened to her during those 2 months. I understand that. Some experiences change you in ways that words cannot capture. I still work at the library, still spend my evenings cataloging old documents and preserving digital history, but I do not explore the deep web anymore. I cannot bring myself to open Tor or follow dead links or wonder what might be hiding just beyond the reach of normal search engines. Sometimes at night, when my husband is asleep and the house is quiet, I think about that blog and the plain white background and the photographs of objects that belong to women who would never come home. I think about how close I came to dismissing it as fiction, how easily I could have clicked away and never thought about it again. I think about the entry for Lomas Boulevard, about the keychain with the letter K, about the weeks I spent trying to warn someone while a woman sat in a storage unit waiting to die. The FBI agent told me I helped save a life, and maybe that is true. But I also know that I found that site by accident, that Russell Embry had been operating for over 10 years before anyone stumbled onto his records, and that there are others out there just like him, patient, careful, invisible, keeping their own journals in the forgotten corners of the internet, waiting for someone to make a mistake. I check my locks 3 times every night now. I installed cameras on every door, and I never, ever leave my blinds open after dark. Friday nights alone used to feel like a luxury. Ben, my husband, was away at a work conference until Sunday, and I had the whole house to myself at the end of Oakdale Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac in a small Michigan town where the most exciting thing that happens is someone getting a new mailbox. I had finished my shows, scrolled through every app on my phone, and was on my second glass of Cabernet when I remembered something my coworker Stephanie mentioned during lunch that week. Her brother had apparently been exploring the deep web and found some disturbing forums there. She made it sound like this forbidden corner of the internet that regular people never see. I got my laptop, started searching for tutorials, and after about an hour I managed to download a Tor browser and figure out how it worked. Most of the links I clicked were garbage, broken pages, stuff in languages I could not read. But then I found this one forum that loaded perfectly, and I wished to God it had been broken too. The forum looked ancient, like something from the early 2000s, with a dark background and plain white text. No fancy graphics, no logos, just threads and usernames that were random strings of numbers and letters. I scrolled through the main page and my curiosity turned into something else entirely. There were threads about things I do not even want to type out. Discussions about surveillance techniques on specific people, complete with photos that were clearly taken without consent. Guides on how to find personal information from social media profiles. One thread had a list of home addresses matched with daily routines of the people who lived there. I felt sick, but I kept scrolling, the way you cannot look away from a car accident. I spent maybe 15 or 20 minutes reading before I finally closed the browser, deleted it from my computer, and tried to convince myself that what I had just seen was probably fake, some kind of elaborate dark joke by edgy teenagers. I poured another glass of wine and told myself I was being paranoid. It could not have been more than 10 minutes after I closed everything. I was in the kitchen rinsing my wine glass when my phone buzzed on the counter. I figured it was Ben checking in or maybe Stephanie sending some meme, so I picked it up without thinking. The message came from a number I did not recognize, no name attached, just a string of digits with an area code I had never seen before. There was no text, just a photo. I tapped on it and my whole body went cold. It was the front of my house. My house. Taken from the street maybe 20 feet from the curb, showing the porch light on and my car in the driveway. The angle was slightly tilted, like someone had snapped it quickly while walking by. I stood there staring at my phone for what felt like a full minute, trying to come up with some logical explanation. Maybe it was a wrong number, some weird coincidence, a realtor sending photos to the wrong contact. But then the second message came through. 3 lights on inside. Kitchen, living room, upstairs bathroom. That was all it said. I read it twice because my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I looked up from my phone and realized the message was accurate. The kitchen light above my head was on. The living room lamp behind me was on. And I had left the bathroom light on upstairs when I came down earlier. Whoever sent this was not guessing. They were watching my house right now, at this exact moment, counting which windows were lit up from the outside. I felt my legs go weak and I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. I wanted to run to the windows and look outside, but something told me that was exactly what they wanted me to do. I wanted to see who was out there, but I also did not want them to see me seeing them. I just stood there in my kitchen, frozen between the urge to look and the fear of what I might find. I grabbed my phone and tried to call Ben. My fingers were trembling so badly that I mistyped his number twice before finally getting it right. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then went to voicemail. I hung up and tried again. Same thing. I sent him a text that probably made no sense, something like, "Call me now, someone outside the house, please call me." Then I tried 911. I dialed the numbers and pressed call, and the screen showed it was connecting, but nothing happened. No ring, no operator, nothing. I pulled the phone away from my face and saw that I had full signal, 4 bars. Everything looked normal. I tried again, and this time it rang once before cutting out completely. I do not know if it was the phone, the network, or something else entirely, but in that moment I felt more alone than I have ever felt in my life. I was standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, and I could not reach a single person who could help me. That is when I heard it. A soft rattling sound coming from the front of the house. It was subtle at first, almost like the wind pushing against the door, but then it got more deliberate. Someone was testing the handle. Not knocking, not ringing the bell, just slowly turning the knob back and forth to see if it would open. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped for a few seconds, then started again. Turn, pause, turn, pause. Like they were being patient about it, checking if anyone would react. I backed away from the kitchen toward the hallway, trying to remember if I'd locked the door when I came home. I always lock the door. I always do. But in that moment, I could not remember, and the doubt was enough to make my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. The rattling stopped again, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. My phone buzzed in my hand and I nearly dropped it. Another message from the same unknown number. This one had no photo, just text. You should not have visited. I stared at those 5 words and felt something click into place in my brain. The forum, the deep web. Somehow, in those 15 or 20 minutes I spent scrolling through that site, someone had tracked me. I thought I was anonymous, thought the Tor browser was supposed to hide everything, but clearly I was wrong. Maybe I clicked something I should not have. Maybe my computer gave away information I did not know it could give. I do not understand how any of it works. And standing there in my hallway with someone outside my door, I realized how stupid I had been. I was a 31-year-old woman who worked in insurance and barely knew how to update her own phone, and I thought I could just waltz into the darkest corner of the internet without consequences. I made a decision. I was not going to stand there like a sitting duck waiting for whatever was going to happen next. I moved as quietly as I could toward the back of the house, staying low, keeping away from the windows. Our house has a back door that leads out to a small patio, and then the yard, which connects to a strip of woods that separates our neighborhood from the next one over. If I could get outside without being seen, I could run to the Nelsons' house 2 doors down. They were an older couple, retired, and I knew they were home because I had seen their living room light on earlier. I reached the back door and put my hand on the lock. It was a sliding glass door, the kind that makes noise no matter how careful you are. I took a breath and started to slide it open, just an inch at first, then a little more. The cold night air hit my face and I was about to step out when my phone buzzed again. The message was a photo. My back patio, taken from somewhere in the yard, maybe near the tree line, showing the sliding glass door I was standing behind. I could see my own silhouette in the image, backlit by the hallway light, my hand on the door frame. The photo had been taken seconds ago. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then stumbled backward and fell against the kitchen island. They were not just at the front of the house, they were everywhere. Watching the front, watching the back, taking photos and sending them to me like some kind of sick game. I crawled across the kitchen floor until I was in the corner between the refrigerator and the wall, the only spot in the house where no window could see me. I pulled my knees up to my chest and sat there shaking, my phone clutched in both hands. I tried 911 again. This time it connected. A woman's voice answered, calm and professional, asking what my emergency was. I started talking so fast I could barely get the words out. I told her someone was outside my house, that they were sending me photos, that they had been trying the door. She asked for my address and I gave it to her, my voice cracking on every syllable. She told me to stay on the line, that she was dispatching a unit to my location, that officers would be there in approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Sounds like nothing when you say it out loud. But when you are sitting on your kitchen floor with strangers circling your house, 8 minutes feels like 8 hours. I stayed in that corner, pressed against the cold tile, listening to every creak and groan the house made. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking if I could hear anything, if anyone was trying to get in. I told her about the front door, about the rattling. She told me to stay away from the doors and windows, to keep the lights on so the officers could identify the house. I remember thinking that the lights were exactly what had given me away in the first place, but I did not argue. I just sat there and waited, counting the seconds in my head. The police arrived in 7 minutes, not 8. I heard the sirens first, distant and getting closer, and then the flash of red and blue lights through the kitchen window. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the house and 4 officers got out. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher until one of them knocked on the front door and announced himself. I got up on shaky legs and walked to the door, checked through the peephole to make sure it was really a uniform, and opened it. The officer was a tall guy, maybe in his 40s, with a calm face that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. I told him what happened, showed him the messages on my phone, pointed toward the backyard where the last photo had been taken. 2 of the officers went around the side of the house with flashlights, while the other 2 stayed with me. I watched their lights sweep across the yard through the trees along the fence line. After about 10 minutes, they came back. They had not found anyone. No footprints in the soft ground near the tree line. No signs that anyone had been standing there. Nothing. The officer who stayed with me, his name tag said Briggs, told me that whoever had been out there must have left when they heard the sirens. He said these things sometimes happen, that there are people who get a thrill out of scaring others, and that the connection to the forum I visited was probably not a coincidence. He explained that some of those sites have ways of tracking visitors that most people do not know about, scripts that can pull your IP address even through a VPN if you are not careful. He asked if I had clicked on anything, downloaded anything, and I told him I did not think so, but I was not sure. He took down all the information, made copies of the messages and photos from my phone, and told me they would look into it. He also suggested I stay somewhere else for the night, maybe with a friend or family member, just to be safe. I called Ben again, and this time he picked up. I could barely explain what happened without crying. He said he would leave the conference first thing in the morning and drive straight home. I spent that night at the Nelsons' house, sitting in their guest room with the lights on, unable to sleep. Ben got home the next afternoon and we went through the house together, room by room, checking every lock, every window, every corner. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was missing. It was like that night had never happened, except for the photos still saved on my phone and the police report with my name on it. The detective assigned to the case called me twice over the following weeks, but he never had any real updates. The phone number that sent the messages was traced to a burner, purchased with cash somewhere in Chicago, already deactivated by the time they looked into it. The photos had no metadata, no GPS coordinates, nothing that could tell them where they came from or who took them. The forum I visited was gone too. I tried to find it again a few days later, just to show Ben what I had seen, but every link led nowhere. It was like it had been erased from the internet completely. The detective said that was common with those kinds of sites, that they appear and disappear all the time to avoid detection. He told me to let him know if anything else happened, but nothing ever did. That was almost 2 years ago. I still live in the same house, still drive down the same street, still wave at the Nelsons when I see them outside. Ben and I got a security system installed, cameras on every corner of the property, motion sensors, the whole setup. I check the footage sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, scrolling through hours of empty driveway and still trees. I have never seen anything unusual. No figures standing at the edge of the yard. No shadows moving where they should not be. Whoever was out there that night, whatever they wanted, they got it and moved on. Or maybe they are still watching from somewhere I cannot see, waiting for something I do not understand. I do not know which possibility scares me more. What I do know is that I will never visit a site like that again, and I will never forget how it felt to see my own silhouette in a photo I did not take. Some doors, once you open them, you cannot close. You just have to hope that whatever came through decides to leave on its own. Boredom can make you do stupid things. At 16, with summer break stretching out like an endless desert and most of my friends away on family vacations, I found myself alone in our house in suburban Milwaukee more often than not. My parents both worked long shifts, Dad at a packaging plant, Mom as a nurse at the county hospital. So from June through August, the house was basically mine from 7 in the morning until 6 at night. I had a decent gaming PC in my room, a graduation gift from my uncle who worked in IT, and way too much unsupervised time on my hands. Most days I would just play online games, watch YouTube videos, or scroll through Reddit until my eyes burned. But that particular summer, around mid-July 2024, I got curious about something I had only heard whispers about in gaming forums and edgy corners of the internet: the deep web. It started innocently enough, or at least that is what I told myself. I downloaded Tor after watching a few videos about internet privacy and how journalists in dangerous countries used it to communicate safely. The first few sites I visited were boring, just forums about cryptocurrency, Some libraries of old books, nothing exciting. But then I stumbled into the stranger corners. Not the illegal marketplaces or anything that extreme. I was curious, not suicidal. But forums where people discussed hacking, shared supposedly leaked documents, and posted cryptic threads about corporate surveillance. One forum in particular caught my attention. It was called the Null Archive, and it presented itself as a community of digital privacy advocates. The interface was ugly, all dark backgrounds and green text like something from an old movie about hackers. I created an account with a fake email and a username I thought was clever at the time, ShadowBite16. I lurked for a few days, reading threads, never posting anything. I figured as long as I did not interact, I was safe. I could not have been more wrong. About 3 weeks into my little exploration phase, I got a private message. The notification icon turned red while I was scrolling through a thread about VPN vulnerabilities, and my first thought was that it must be some kind of automated welcome message or spam. The username that sent it was adminnull7, and the message itself was short, almost casual in tone. It just said, "You should be more careful, ShadowBite. Your OPSEC is terrible. Check your downloads folder." I remember staring at those words for a full minute, trying to convince myself it was a prank, some kind of hazing ritual the forum did to new members. But something in my gut told me to actually check. I minimized Tor and opened my downloads folder, and there it was. A text file I had never seen before, dated that same day, named helloshadow.txt. I had not downloaded anything. I had not clicked any links. The file had just appeared on my computer like it had always been there. I wish I could say I was smart enough to shut everything down right then, pull the plug on my PC, and never look back. But curiosity is a powerful drug, especially when you are 16 and think you are invincible. I opened the text file. Inside was a list, and when I started reading it, my whole body went cold in a way I had never experienced before. It was my browser history from the past month, not just from Tor, but from Chrome too. Every single site I had visited laid out in neat chronological order. Below that was a list of the photos saved on my computer, including the file names of pictures I had taken on my phone and transferred over. Then came my school schedule for the upcoming semester, pulled from an email I had received from Roosevelt High 2 weeks earlier. And at the very bottom, in plain text like it was nothing special at all, was my home address. My actual home address. The house where I was sitting alone at that very moment, reading words that a stranger had somehow planted on my computer. I slammed my laptop shut like it was on fire. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it pounding in my ears, and for a long moment I just sat there in my dim bedroom, staring at the closed computer like it might spring open on its own. The house felt different now, bigger and emptier than it had 5 minutes ago. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the air conditioning made me jump. I kept thinking about that address at the bottom of the file, how casually it had been placed there, like a signature at the end of a letter. Whoever this adminnull7 person was, they knew where I lived. They could be anyone, anywhere in the world, but they knew the exact street where I slept every night. I thought about calling my parents, but what would I even say? That I had been poking around illegal hacking forums and now someone was messing with me? I could already picture my dad's face, the disappointment mixed with anger, the lectures that would follow. So I did nothing. I just sat there in the growing dark, too scared to open my computer again, but too ashamed to ask for help. After maybe an hour of sitting paralyzed in my room, I finally worked up the nerve to open the laptop again. There was another message waiting in my Null Archive inbox, sent about 20 minutes after the first one. "Relax," it said. "I am not the one you need to worry about. I am the one warning you. Someone on this forum has been running a data harvesting operation for months. They target new accounts, especially ones with weak security like yours. Your device was compromised the moment you created your account. Keylogger, remote access, the whole package. I am an admin here, and I have seen what happens to people who ignore this. Delete your account, wipe your hard drive, and pray they have not already sold your information. This is not a joke. There was a second file attached to this message, and against every instinct screaming at me to stop, I downloaded it. It was a screenshot of a conversation in some other chat platform I did not recognize, all in a language that looked like Russian. But in the middle of the conversation, highlighted in yellow, was my username, ShadowBite16, followed by a dollar amount, $200. Someone was selling access to my computer, my files, my life, for $200. The next few hours were a blur of panic and frantic Googling. I searched for what to do if your computer has a keylogger, how to tell if someone has remote access to your PC, what happens when your personal information gets sold online. The answers I found only made things worse. Keyloggers could capture every password I had ever typed, my email, my social media, the Amazon account I used to buy video games with a prepaid card. Remote access meant someone could turn on my webcam without the light coming on, could watch me sitting in my room without me ever knowing. And once your data was sold, there was no taking it back. It could be copied, shared, resold 100 times over, passed around like trading cards among people who made their living exploiting strangers. I thought about all the things saved on my computer, family photos from vacations, pictures of my little sister's birthday party last year, screenshots of conversations with friends. Nothing illegal, nothing even embarrassing really, but all of it suddenly felt exposed, violated, like someone had gone through my dresser drawers and touched everything I owned. I unplugged my webcam with trembling fingers and put a piece of electrical tape over the built-in camera on my laptop for good measure. Around 9 that night, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I did not recognize. The message contained nothing but a photo. A picture of my house taken from across the street, the living room windows glowing yellow in the summer darkness. I could see the silhouette of our couch through the curtains, the flickering blue light of the TV my dad must have left on that morning. Below the image was a single line of text. "Nice place. You should really close your blinds at night." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. For a moment I could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stand frozen in the middle of my bedroom with every light suddenly feeling too bright and every shadow too deep. Someone was outside. Someone had been standing across the street from my house taking pictures, and now they wanted me to know it. This was not some faceless hacker on the other side of the world anymore. This was someone close enough to see my living room, someone who knew I was home alone, and wanted me to understand just how vulnerable I really was. I ran through the house, closing every blind, locking every door, checking every window twice. My hands would not stop shaking as I pulled the curtains shut in the living room, and I kept imagining eyes watching me from the darkness outside, tracking my movements through the gaps in the fabric. When I finished, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator, knees pulled up to my chest, phone clutched in my sweaty palm. I wanted to call my parents so badly it hurt, but the shame was like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. How could I explain this? How could I tell them that their son had been stupid enough to wander into corners of the internet he had no business visiting, and now someone was stalking him because of it? I thought about calling the police, but what would I even report? Someone took a picture of my house? Someone sent me a text message? I could already hear how ridiculous it would sound, could already see the skeptical look on some officer's face as I tried to explain the deep web and keyloggers, and data harvesting to someone who probably still used their birthday as a password. So I just sat there on the cold tile floor, watching the minutes tick by on the microwave clock, waiting for my parents to come home and trying not to cry. My mom walked through the door around 10:30, and the relief I felt at the sound of her keys in the lock was so overwhelming that I almost broke down right there in the kitchen. But I held it together, told her I was just getting a late snack, tried to make my voice sound normal even though it felt like my throat was filled with sand. She looked tired from her shift and did not seem to notice anything wrong, just kissed the top of my head and went upstairs to shower. Dad came home about an hour later, and by then I had retreated to my room, lying in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling and jumping at every sound. I did not sleep that night. Every time I started to drift off, my phone would light up with another message from that unknown number. Sometimes just a single emoji, a smiley face or a waving hand. Sometimes a few words like, "Still awake?" or "Try to get some rest, big day tomorrow." They knew I was not sleeping. They knew I was lying there in the dark, terrified, and they were enjoying it. By the time the sun started coming up, I had received 17 messages, and each one felt like a finger poking at an open wound, reminding me that there was nowhere I could hide. The next morning, I made a decision. I was too exhausted and too scared to keep carrying this alone, and the messages had made one thing very clear. Whoever was doing this was not going to stop on their own. I waited until my dad was drinking his coffee at the kitchen table, my mom already gone for an early shift, and I sat down across from him and told him everything. I started from the beginning, from the boredom and the Tor browser and the forum with the ugly green text, and I watched his face shift from confusion to concern, to something that looked a lot like fear. When I showed him the text messages, the photo of our house, the file with our address in it, he went pale in a way I had never seen before. He did not yell at me, did not lecture me about being stupid or reckless. He just sat there for a long moment with his jaw tight and his hands wrapped around his coffee mug like he was trying to keep them steady. Then he picked up his phone and called the police. 2 officers came to our house an hour later, and I had to explain the whole thing again. Had to watch them exchange glances when I mentioned the deep web. Had to sit there feeling small and foolish while they took notes and asked questions I did not know how to answer. The investigation that followed lasted almost 3 months. It turned out that the person behind the harassment was not some shadowy international hacker. It was a 19-year-old college dropout named Brendan Lowe, who lived about 40 minutes away in Racine. He had been running a small-scale data harvesting scheme on the Null archive for over a year, targeting teenagers specifically because they were easy marks with poor security habits and parents who might pay to make problems go away. The photo of my house had been taken by someone he paid $20 to on a local gig app, just some random person who thought they were doing a harmless errand. Brendan had never actually been outside my house himself. He was not brave enough for that. But he had built a whole system designed to make his victims feel watched, hunted, completely alone. The police found files on his computer from dozens of kids like me, folders full of personal information he had collected and either sold or used for blackmail. I was lucky, they told me. I came forward before he had a chance to do any real damage with my data. Other kids had not been so fortunate. Some had paid him money to leave them alone. Others had their photos posted on revenge websites. A few had their identities stolen in ways that took years to untangle. Brendan was arrested and eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of computer fraud, identity theft, and cyber stalking. He got 6 years in federal prison, which felt like both too much and not nearly enough. It has been almost a year and a half since all of this happened, and I still think about it more often than I would like to admit. I changed all my passwords, wiped my computer completely, deleted every social media account I had, and started fresh with new emails and new usernames. My parents installed better security software on all our devices and had a long conversation with me about internet safety that I actually listened to this time. But some things you cannot just delete or reset. I still get a jolt of panic whenever my phone buzzes with a text from a number I do not recognize. I still close my blinds before the sun goes down, every single night, even in winter when it gets dark by 5. And sometimes, when I am lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I think about how close I came to having my whole life ruined by a bored college dropout in Racine, who saw me as nothing more than a username and a $sign. The internet is not some separate world that exists apart from real life. It is a door, and once you open it, you cannot always control who walks through. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I am sharing this because maybe someone reading this is sitting alone in their room right now. thinking about exploring some dark corner of the web just to see what is out there. Trust me when I say this. Whatever you think you might find, it is not worth what you might lose. At the time this happened, life felt predictable in a way that almost bored me. I was working remotely, renting a small place on the edge of a quiet Midwestern town, and spending most nights scrolling forums instead of talking to people. Curiosity had become a habit, especially anything involving obscure corners of the internet and the strange things people claim to find there. That's how I came across an ad for a dark web mystery box labeled "Authentic Unclaimed Items," written in sloppy text with no branding and no explanation. The price was low enough to feel reckless, but not stupid, which probably says more about my mindset than I'd like to admit. I told myself it was just leftover junk from storage lockers or abandoned mail. Nothing dangerous, nothing real, just something to break the routine and give me a story to read later. I placed the order late at night and closed my laptop, already forgetting about it. For a few days, life went on exactly the same. The package arrived wrapped in plain brown layers with no return address, heavier than I expected. Inside, everything was arranged carefully, almost respectfully, like someone packing memories instead of objects. There was a small spiral notebook with a cracked black cover, the kind sold at gas stations, its pages warped like they'd been near moisture. A cheap prepaid phone sat underneath, powered off with scratches along the screen that formed a faint crescent. At the bottom of the box was a plastic bag tied with a knot so tight I had to cut it open. Inside were clothes, dark jeans and a hoodie, stiff with dried soil and carrying a sour metallic smell that clung to my fingers. None of it felt random, and that realization crept in slowly. This wasn't clutter. This was a selection. I sat at my kitchen table flipping through the notebook, expecting rambling thoughts or nonsense entries. Instead, most pages were filled with short lines, repeated phrases, and odd notes about locations written in a careful, almost apologetic handwriting. One phrase appeared again and again, underlined each time as if it mattered more than the rest. On impulse, I typed that phrase into a regular search engine, expecting nothing. What came up made the room feel smaller in a way I can't properly explain. The phrase matched a line quoted in a local news article about a woman named Hannah Cole, who had disappeared several years earlier. The article mentioned a notebook found at her apartment with the same wording, described as something she wrote during bouts of anxiety. Photos showed her smiling awkwardly at the camera, wearing clothes disturbingly similar to what sat in my trash bag. I closed the laptop and just sat there, listening to the refrigerator hum like it was the only thing still working properly. Sleep didn't come easily after that, and the following days felt stretched thin, like time was dragging itself forward. I kept the box sealed in a closet, telling myself distance would make it feel less real, but it didn't help. Late one evening, a notification lit up my screen from an encrypted account I didn't recognize. The message was short and polite, thanking me for the purchase and asking if the items met my expectations. Attached was a single photo. It showed the front of my house taken from the street, porch light on, curtains drawn exactly the way I leave them at night. There was no explanation, no threat, just proof that the sender knew where I lived. That was the moment it became clear the box hadn't been a novelty at all. It was a message, and I had just confirmed that it had been delivered to the right person. I didn't reply to the message, but ignoring it didn't bring any relief. Every sound outside started to carry weight, like it was trying to tell me something. Cars passing too slowly, the scrape of wind against the siding, footsteps that might have been mine echoing in the wrong direction. The prepaid phone from the box sat powered off on my counter, and I couldn't stop staring at it, wondering if it would light up on its own. When I finally turned it on, the screen blinked to life without asking for a code. There were no contacts saved, no apps, just one photo in the gallery. It showed a patch of ground freshly disturbed, with the corner of fabric barely visible beneath the dirt. The image metadata had been stripped, leaving no clues except the quiet certainty that it wasn't meant for me to admire. It felt like an invitation I never asked for. That night dragged on in pieces. I tried distracting myself with television, then music, but everything sounded too loud or too empty. At some point, another message came through the same encrypted account, asking again for feedback, phrased almost cheerfully. The casual tone made it worse, like the sender enjoyed pretending this was a normal transaction. I noticed then that the account name matched a phrase written on the inside cover of the notebook, something I hadn't paid attention to before. That detail stuck with me more than the photo had. It suggested planning, patience, and a long awareness of how this would play out. Whoever sent the box hadn't acted on impulse. They had waited for someone like me to bite. I made the decision to involve the authorities the next morning, bringing everything with me in sealed bags. The reaction was measured but tense, the kind of calm that doesn't promise comfort. They recognized Hannah Cole's name immediately and asked questions I struggled to answer, like why I'd ordered the box in the first place and how much I'd interacted with the seller. The notebook and clothing were taken away, and the phone disappeared into an evidence locker. An officer advised me to stay with a friend for a while and keep my routines unpredictable, which sounded surreal coming from someone in uniform. Before I left, another message came through on my phone, unread by them. It simply said, "You weren't the first choice." That sentence followed me out of the building and all the way to the borrowed couch I slept on that night. Weeks passed without another message, and eventually the silence became its own kind of answer. The investigation didn't lead anywhere public, and I stopped checking forums altogether. The part that stays with me isn't the fear anymore, but the realization that someone out there used a missing person's life as leverage, as proof of reach. The box was never about shock value or entertainment. It was a test, a way to see who would look closely enough to understand what they were holding. I still don't know why I was chosen in the end, or what happened to Hannah beyond what's already known. All I know is that curiosity used to feel harmless to me, and now it feels like something that watches back. Eventually, I stopped waiting for another message and focused on doing something practical instead of spiraling. I moved out of that house entirely, not dramatically, just quietly, packing my things over a weekend and leaving no forwarding address tied to my name. I changed numbers, scrubbed old accounts, and abandoned the online spaces where I'd first found the listing. It wasn't about running away so much as removing myself from the path I'd unknowingly stepped onto. The authorities never told me outright to disappear, but their silence said enough. No updates, no reassurance, just the understanding that some doors, once opened, don't close cleanly. I told myself relocation was temporary, a pause until the anxiety eased. Deep down, I knew it was permanent. Months later, a detective contacted me once more, asking if I'd noticed anything unusual after the move. Nothing had arrived, no photos, no messages, no reminders. The seller's account had vanished, along with the listing, as if it had never existed. The case tied to the notebook remained unresolved, officially still open, unofficially stalled. They believed the box had been assembled years earlier and circulated deliberately, passed from seller to seller as a kind of credential, proof of proximity, proof of history, proof that the person behind the screen wasn't bluffing. Hearing that reframed everything. I hadn't been targeted for who I was, but for who I represented. Someone curious enough to open the box and careful enough to understand it. I still think about the moment I clicked buy, how casual it felt, how small the decision seemed. The unsettling part isn't the threat that followed, but the professionalism of it all. No rage, no urgency, just calm confirmation that access existed. Whoever sent that box didn't need to act further. The message had landed. I was aware now, and awareness was the point. Sometimes I imagine that box sitting on another kitchen table somewhere, opened by someone else, starting the same chain of recognition. That thought keeps me grounded in a strange way. It reminds me that survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just knowing when to stop looking. These days, My life looks ordinary again from the outside. New routines, new surroundings, fewer late nights online. I don't chase mysteries anymore, and I don't open doors just because they're there. When people joke about dark web stories or mystery boxes, I stay quiet. There are things that exist solely to confirm they can reach you, not to entertain you. I learned that lesson without anyone knocking on my door or saying my name out loud, and I'm grateful for that. If this story sounds restrained or unfinished, that's because it is. Some experiences don't end with answers. They end with distance, and that's the best outcome I could have hoped for. Late nights had become routine for me during that period, mostly because my sleep schedule was wrecked, and the apartment felt quieter after midnight. I'm Jason, and at the time I lived alone in a small rented place above a closed-down bookstore, working remote tech support and barely seeing anyone in person. Most evenings ended the same way: cheap takeout, dim desk lamp, laptop open, headphones on. That night wasn't special in any obvious way, and that's probably why it stuck with me so hard later. I remember the faint hum of my old ceiling fan and the way the hallway light outside my door flickered every few minutes. I had been bouncing between forums out of boredom, clicking links without much thought. Curiosity won over common sense like it usually does when you're tired and alone. Eventually, I ended up on an anonymous video chat site, buried deep behind a string of links I probably shouldn't have followed. The connection took longer than usual, showing a black screen and distorted audio pops before stabilizing. When the other person appeared, the feed was grainy and low-lit, just a vague outline of a head and shoulders. The voice came through clear, calm, and strangely relaxed, asking generic questions about music and work. I answered casually, leaning back in my chair, not giving away anything personal. A minute or two in, the tone shifted without warning. He mentioned the cracked mug on my desk, then the stack of unopened mail beside my keyboard. I hadn't said a word about my surroundings, and my camera light was definitely off. I laughed it off at first, assuming a lucky guess, but the way he described the peeling sticker on my laptop lid made my chest tighten. That detail wasn't visible unless you were in the room or watching from my end. The video started stuttering after that, freezing every few seconds while the audio kept going. His mouth would stop moving, but the voice continued, responding to things I hadn't finished saying yet. At one point, my screen locked completely on a distorted frame, yet he kept talking, commenting on the sound of my fan and asking why I never fixed it. I tried to close the tab, but my cursor lagged like it was dragging through wet cement. The temperature in the room felt heavier, not colder, just dense, like the air before a storm. I could hear my own breathing through the headphones, louder than it should have been. Then, abruptly, the screen went black and the site kicked me back to the homepage. No error message, no warning, just silence and my reflection staring back at me. I sat there longer than I care to admit, listening to the building settle and trying to convince myself it was some elaborate trick. Eventually, I shut everything down and went to bed, though sleep came in short, shallow bursts. The next afternoon, daylight made the apartment feel less threatening, but the unease hadn't faded. While clearing space on my laptop, I opened a hidden system folder I didn't recognize, buried deep in my files. Inside were short video clips, all time-stamped weeks before that night. Each one showed me at my desk, from the exact angle my webcam would capture, sometimes typing, sometimes just sitting there staring at the screen. In one clip, I paused and glanced directly at the camera, like I sensed something, even though I remembered nothing about it. That was when the weight of it really sank in, and the fear stopped feeling abstract. Panic didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly as I opened each file and realized how far back they went. Some clips showed early mornings, sunlight barely cutting through the blinds. Others caught the room lit only by my desk lamp late at night. The most unsettling part was how ordinary I looked in them, completely unaware. In one video, I adjusted the webcam slightly, something I don't remember ever doing. Another, I leaned in close to the screen, squinting like I was reading something specific. My throat felt dry as I checked the metadata and saw the files had been accessed repeatedly, not just created. Whoever did this didn't just watch once and disappear. They came back. That evening, every small sound in the apartment felt amplified. The fan hummed unevenly, the pipes clicked behind the walls, and footsteps from the stairwell lingered longer than usual. I covered the webcam with tape, unplugged it, then unplugged the laptop entirely, even though part of me knew that might already be pointless. Opening my router settings revealed unfamiliar login attempts from addresses that didn't match anything local. One device name stood out, labeled with a string of characters that looked almost intentional, not random. I reset passwords, changed settings, and shut down anything I didn't recognize. Still, the sense of being watched refused to leave, like a thought you can't shake no matter how hard you try. Later that night, curiosity pushed back against fear, and I checked the site again from a different device. The homepage loaded, but my username history was gone, wiped clean. No record of the session, no trace I had ever been there. As I scrolled through my files once more, I noticed something I had missed earlier. A short audio clip saved separately from the videos. It was just background noise at first, the fan, my typing, a faint city sound through the window. Then a second voice came through, quiet and close, speaking words that matched what had been said during the call. Hearing it outside the context of the chat made it feel much more real, much more intentional. By the end of that day, I stopped trying to explain it away. I contacted a specialist through my job, someone who dealt with security breaches, and handed over everything without keeping copies. The advice was blunt. Wipe the system completely, replace hardware, move on. I followed it all, relocated a few weeks later, and rebuilt my routines from scratch. Nothing like that ever happened again, at least not in a way I could prove. Still, sometimes late at night, I catch myself lowering my voice around devices, aware of how easily access can happen without permission. That one night didn't just scare me, it permanently changed how safe alone feels. Months passed, and the fear dulled into something quieter but heavier. Life looked normal on the surface again. New apartment, new laptop, new routines. Still, certain habits never left. I positioned screens away from where I slept, avoided mirrors reflecting monitors, and shut devices down completely instead of letting them rest. Friends noticed I flinched when video calls lagged or audio desynced, but I never explained why. Talking about it felt pointless, like trying to describe a sound you only hear in dreams. Part of me hoped that by staying silent, whatever had happened would lose interest. Another part knew silence had never really stopped anyone before. One evening, curiosity pulled me back to my old backups, the ones I'd stored on an external drive and sworn not to touch. I plugged it in, half expecting nothing to load, half expecting something worse. Most of the data was gone, corrupted during the wipe process, but one folder remained intact. Inside was a single text file I didn't remember creating. The contents were short, written like notes, describing my habits in unsettling detail. When I stayed up late, how often I paced while thinking, which nights I talked to myself without realizing it. At the bottom was a line mentioning the video chat, phrased like an observation rather than a memory. That was the moment I understood this wasn't random curiosity on someone else's part. It was study. I deleted the file, formatted the drive, and destroyed it physically this time. Not out of panic, but decision. There was no winning by trying to understand the person behind it. No closure waiting in more evidence. I reported what little I still had through proper channels and accepted that I might never get answers. What mattered more was reclaiming some sense of control, even if it was symbolic. I started leaving lights on, keeping curtains open at night and refusing to let fear dictate every choice. The feeling of being observed slowly faded into the background. Never gone, but no longer consuming everything. Toggle. Now, when people talk casually about anonymous platforms or joke about webcams watching them, I don't laugh along. I listen. I know how ordinary that night felt before it turned strange, How easily curiosity slipped into vulnerability. Nothing dramatic ever followed. No knock at the door. No final message explaining it all. It simply stopped. And somehow that silence is what unsettles me most. Whatever crossed into my life that night didn't need to announce itself again. It already knew enough. Running a small independent channel online had always felt like shouting into a tunnel and listening for an echo. The content was slow-burn investigative stuff, mostly disappearances people stopped talking about years ago. At the time, life was quiet and repetitive, split between editing late at night and working a day job that barely paid the bills. The channel wasn't big enough to matter, but it was just visible enough to attract strange emails. Messages from armchair detectives, grieving relatives, and trolls blended together until they all sounded the same. I answered some, ignored most, and learned to trust my instincts about which ones felt genuine. That routine made it easy to miss the moment when things shifted. Looking back, the warning signs were there, just subtle enough to brush aside. The day everything happened started like any other upload day, with coffee gone cold beside the keyboard. Message didn't come through the usual channels. It arrived from an address made of random letters and numbers. No name attached, no signature at the bottom. The sender claimed to have real evidence connected to a disappearance I had covered months earlier, one that never sat right with me. They referenced details I had never made public, including a misfiled report number and a witness statement that vanished from public records. That alone was unsettling. But curiosity has a way of pushing past caution. The tone wasn't dramatic or threatening, just blunt and strangely formal. There was a link included, pointing to a dark web mirror, along with instructions to use encryption software I'd only read about. I stared at the screen longer than I want to admit, weighing the risk against the chance that this was real. Eventually, curiosity won. Accessing the files felt like stepping into a room with no windows. The material itself looked authentic. Scans with consistent metadata, audio clips with background noise that matched known locations, and timestamps that lined up too well to fake easily. One folder contained raw footage that clearly hadn't been edited for public eyes. There were moments where the camera shook as if the person filming hesitated, unsure whether to keep recording. Even without understanding the full context, the implication was disturbing. It wasn't sensational or cinematic, which made it worse. The kind of evidence that feels heavy just sitting on your hard drive. I closed everything and disconnected from the internet, heart racing, trying to process what I had just seen. That was when the first sign of retaliation hit. Within hours, accounts I rarely used began locking me out. Password reset emails flooded in, followed by notifications that my content had been flagged en masse. Then came messages from strangers accusing me of crimes I'd never heard of, using my real name instead of my handle. Someone submitted false emergency reports tied to my address, the kind meant to provoke a dangerous response. The anonymous sender resurfaced with a new tone, no longer neutral, laying out demands with cold precision. They didn't want money or silence. They wanted control over the story itself. Publish their version of events. Frame certain people as unreliable, omit specific details, or watch everything I'd built collapse under coordinated pressure. I realized then that the evidence wasn't just information, it was leverage, and I was already trapped inside the narrative they designed. Sleep didn't really happen after that. Every sound in the apartment carried weight. Every notification felt like another escalation. I spent hours reading the demands over and over, trying to decode what they really wanted me to erase. They sent a rough outline of the story I was supposed to publish, complete with suggested phrases and timestamps. It wasn't fan fiction or speculation. It was surgical, rewriting motives and shifting timelines just enough to redirect blame. What scared me most was how confident they sounded, like they already knew what I would do next. They referenced private drafts from my editing software, sentences I had deleted and never uploaded. That meant they had been inside my system longer than I realized. The sense of being observed didn't come from paranoia anymore. It came from receipts. I tried reaching out for advice carefully, using devices that hadn't been connected to my home network. A journalist friend responded cautiously, urging me to stop engaging and preserve everything. Before I could even reply, my phone lit up with calls from unknown numbers, one after another, until it overheated in my hand. Voicemails followed, robotic at first, then unsettlingly human, accusing me of interference. Online, threads popped up dissecting my personal life with eerie accuracy, listing old addresses, relatives, even a photo taken through a window I never remembered posing for. None of it asked for ransom. It was all pressure, tightening minute by minute, designed to isolate me until compliance felt like relief. I understood then that this wasn't about hiding the truth, but reshaping it. The breaking point came when a patrol car showed up outside my building after a fabricated welfare check. Watching through the blinds as officers knocked on my door was surreal, like seeing a scene from my own channel play out in real time. I managed to explain enough to avoid escalation, but the message was clear. They could reach into the physical world whenever they wanted. Another encrypted message arrived shortly after, acknowledging the visit with disturbing casualness. The sender reminded me that narratives don't need to be true to be effective, only consistent and loud. I felt backed into a corner where every option carried risk. Publishing their version meant becoming a mouthpiece, while refusing meant losing control entirely. I made a decision that afternoon, driven less by bravery and more by exhaustion. Instead of posting their script, I released a short video stepping away from the case altogether, citing safety concerns without details. Simultaneously, I handed copies of the files and communication logs to a legal advocate recommended by my friend, using a chain of custody I hoped would protect me later. The retaliation didn't stop immediately, but it lost momentum, like a storm running out of fuel. Accounts quieted, false reports ceased, and the anonymous messages slowed to silence. The evidence never saw daylight in the way I once imagined, and that still bothers me. What stayed with me was the realization that truth can be treated like contraband, traded and threatened, not for profit, but for power over the story itself. Days passed in a strange half-normal rhythm, where grocery trips and emails coexisted with the lingering sense that the walls had ears. Work on the channel slowed to a crawl, not because of fear alone, but because trust in the process had fractured. Editing software felt hostile, like a room that had already been searched. Even harmless comments under older videos carried a new weight, every username a question mark. Friends noticed the distance in my voice when we talked, the way I deflected simple questions. There was no dramatic climax after that decision, just a long exhale where nothing else happened. Silence became the loudest outcome, and part of me wondered if that had been the goal all along. Eventually, the legal side moved forward quietly, without spectacle or updates I could share. The files went somewhere beyond my reach, sealed into procedures I didn't fully understand. That brought a measure of relief, but also a hollow feeling, like handing off a truth and never learning where it lands. Online, the smear attempts faded into the background noise where they belonged. New rumors replaced the old ones, and attention drifted, as it always does. The attackers never confirmed retreat or defeat, only absence. That uncertainty lingered longer than the threats ever did. It taught me that power doesn't always announce itself when it leaves. Months later, confidence in technology never fully returned. New habits formed without conscious planning, small changes meant to reduce exposure. The channel survived, smaller and quieter, but still mine. Viewers noticed a shift towards safer topics, though few questioned it openly. Those who did received vague answers, because specifics still felt dangerous to share. The experience stripped away the illusion that independent creators operate outside influence. Influence just wears different clothes at smaller scales. Control doesn't need a headline to function. Looking back, the most unsettling part wasn't the hacking or the intimidation. It was how easily information became a bargaining chip, reshaped to serve whoever held it last. Evidence that should have clarified a disappearance instead became a weapon to rewrite it. That realization changed how I see every unresolved case now, every leak, every exclusive. Some truths aren't buried because they're lost, but because someone is actively deciding which version survives. Stepping away kept me safe, but it didn't bring closure. The story still exists, just fragmented, living in places I no longer follow. That's the part that stays with me, even now.